All right, we're live. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Break the Rules stream. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov. This is Free for All Friday. We're joined by Jules Hamilton in secret right now. Jules is not going to be speaking, unfortunately, for a bit, but I look forward to when Jules is going to start speaking again. Anyway, we got a very interesting panel for you today. We're going to be talking about demonology, demons, and we have two. I'm very thankful to be joined by two experts in this field. First off, we got my friend Drew Arnold back with us, and we also have Yakov Alive from the Skinwalker Tapes podcast. Great podcast. So,
Thank
Drew,
you.
you're welcome. So, Drew, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you fit into the search for knowledge, and what exactly is out there beyond our comprehension?
Sure, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and I always appreciate the discussions that you have on and the many twists and turns they take. And I always think I learn a lot from them.
Same here.
My background is I'm an artist. I come from animation, visual effects, and I've worked on a lot of music videos and maybe some things people have seen, commercials, etc. But in my out time, in my in time. I, for a number of years, have put a focus on the study of mysticism and different mystical orders, different social orders, and essentially where this meets the culture, right? And it's not just about the guy and who goes into the middle of a cave and comes out. It's effectively, how does this associate culturally? So I've been in a number of mystical orders, some public, some not, and I have a pretty extensive library. I wouldn't call myself an expert by any means because I don't know if there are any true experts on it, but I really love to delve into the study of consciousness, how it relates to inner and outer life, and where this meets, how it effectively manipulates and changes reality around us. So that's my background, and I'm excited to be a part of this and share some knowledge.
Excellent. And Yakov, how do you fit into being interested in all this?
I'm just a weirdo. Some of my earliest memories are going to the library and taking out books about folklore and UFOs and cryptids and all of these weird things. As I got older, my interest in the occult and just weird stuff in general, I want to say it matured a little in like the worst way possible, become like obsessed with politics and conspiracies and all of that. I guess you could say early on, I was something of a student of Bill Cooper's shortwave radio broadcasts. I listened to all of those. And I think that informed me on subjects like the mystery schools and you could say the Illuminati and these sorts of things. And that's what initially inspired me to do a podcast, which is Skinwalker Tapes. We do a paranormal show, with some edgy, funny content. We're trying to take things too seriously because if you do in these circles, you'll just go goddamn crazy. Yeah. So basically I'm just a guy who's interested and wants to know everything that's supposed to be hidden. Everything I'm not supposed to know, I want to know it, basically.
I'm so happy the two of you are here, united by this. And something that I was sharing earlier on with Yakov, back when we were doing our video with you, Drew, when I was researching all of your history, like your old animations, you were one of the people who was originally behind the Tea Party movement. And I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about that. And also, in this Reason article, it talks about how you were interested in something called Rex 84. He says, look it up if you don't know about it, because it basically means that the government can lock any of us up for any reason. So you were like OG when it comes to being concerned about the ramifications of governmental control. So what was it that inspired you to go in that direction? And can you talk a little bit about the remnants of this movement, what exactly is left and how much has been subverted so far?
I would say that I'm definitely not an OG, and if you bring up people like William Cooper, Bill Cooper, he's probably the OG of the Tea Party movement, I would think. I mean, I think there are libertarian candidates who came out of the 1970s, et cetera. But, when you talk about the grassroots force behind what drove the Tea Party movement, and even though the Tea Party movement was originally founded around supporting Dr. Ron Paul's run for Republican president. Essentially, he was running in the Republican primaries, and he had been around for a long time. But I believe that the real OGs are people who are bringing to light a lot of the governmental malfeasance, especially through the CIA and certain types of families like the Bush families who essentially helped build the CIA and spread them across the planet. When there was an opportunity in 2015, 2016, where the libertarian candidate, who was essentially a Republican at that part in time, Ron Paul, he had been a congressman for a very long point in time. He was running for president, and essentially it was between him and McCain. Essentially, there was a third person, I can't remember who right now. The Tea Party didn't exist yet, but there was a moment where all of these libertarian people, Republicans, decided they were going to raise money for Ron Paul, and got together in all these different cities, had a telethon. We were supporting him. We were helping build his presence for a long time. But this event was called the Tea Party, and it was a fundraising night. And I think we'd raised $2.2 million that night, which was at that point in time a record. Something like, I can't remember what that number actually was, but it was a record. And everybody came out of that really energized. Ron Paul almost clinched the nomination only because the Republican Party had to change the rules. Because what had happened was McCain's people didn't show up to when they were tallying the votes during the primaries. So they had to change the rules on the floor. Ron Paul had his people packed in. McCain's people didn't show up. And essentially they had to do a nomination by the party chair. So what people don't really understand is that Ron Paul almost became the Republican candidate, stealing it from underneath McCain, which was not supposed to happen, right? We'll fast forward several months, and all of a sudden, the Tea Party was a party which was underwritten by some rich, whatever, the Koch brothers, some others, and had the face of Sarah Palin, Glenn Beck, and other people who were essentially considered rhinos, Republicans in name only, by people who were a part of this movement. Now, where did these people come from? They had a massive rally on the Capitol building, in front of the Capitol building, drawing hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people there. And all of a sudden, there was a man named Paul Ryan who became Speaker of the House overnight. Nobody had ever heard of him. We had talked about this. All of a sudden, we have this massive party filled with people who were never a part of the original movement. And for what people can imagine, that this was co-opted by some governmental agency funded in order to control the movement. And all of the original people who were a part of this were nowhere to be seen. They completely evaporated. They were not a part of the new party. And even worse, what we now know is that John McCain had given the names of all the Tea Party candidates, because all the Tea Party people who were part of the original party, to Obama, which is one of the scandals people don't talk about, the Obama administration. Obama then, on behalf of John McCain, sent the IRS after all of the Tea Party people, primarily their businesses. There was a class action lawsuit that was won against the IRS and the government for millions of dollars, that they were targeting businesses run by Tea Party members. And there should have been another class action lawsuit on behalf of the individuals, because, like me, Many other people were audited. I was audited by the IRS for 5 years of taxes.
Damn.
And this was, and it lasted for 9 months. I had to continuously go back to the IRS office. So we were targeted. The IRS was what you call weaponized. And essentially it was a hostile, what you call a hostile takeover, and turning it into essentially trying to disintegrate it. I think what ended up happening is that you now have this movement comprised within the Trump movement. And people don't talk about the natural progression of the Tea Party originalists. There are a lot of people who are not a part of it, but there's a linear movement from the end of the Tea Party through to what Trump figured out that he could rally together. And it's that populist grassroots movement, which essentially, you can argue whether Trump is grassroots or not, but the original grassroots movement was essentially pulled over into the Trump campaign where we are now. And back then, I was very much into conspiracy theories. Rex 84 was penned by Ronald Reagan. Is essentially a program that the government could essentially do almost anything they wanted at any point in time. And it was an executive order that came out maybe 1984 or something like that. So, I was very much interested then in government overreach and all of these different ways the government could essentially get you. And back then I was really into, I was much more into the conspiracy side of it. But since then I've gotten more into like the mystical stuff. And figured out how that bridges. So I'm excited for this conversation as a way to sort of talk about that some more.
Well, the two are definitely intertwined. And when it comes to yourself, Yakov, back when Drew Arnold was getting into a lot of these things, what mindset did you have, and did it change over the years? And just tell us a little bit about your own progression through this whole time, watching all these movements come and go.
Back in the Ron Paul days, man, that it makes me a little teary-eyed to think about a day when it seemed like our situation could be solved by politics, by like a well-intentioned figure. Everybody loved him. Everyone in government liked him. You didn't have to agree with him, but nobody thought he was a bad guy. But like that's what happens. He just gets brushed under the rug like that. I was a Ron Paul guy, 2008, 2012, and I was very much into the Bill Cooper conspiracy theories. I was probably listening to a lot of Alex Jones at the time. I was diving through all the rabbit holes. Since then, like I used to think like we were gonna get out of this. Like people were gonna like, I don't even know what the hell. The sheeple were going to wake up and suddenly the problems would be solved or something. Critical mass would be reached and we would figure this shit out. Things have gotten a lot worse. And you're talking about Reagan, writing laws and things. And like we're seeing all these things happen right now, all this authoritarian crap. I'm going to say like they're bringing in the Chinese system and all that. The pieces have been in place for so goddamn long. And I don't know if the way they're handling it is getting more brazen. I think it is, or if it's like the way the media makes us think it is. We're at a point, I don't think there's any political solution whatsoever. All that kumbaya Ron Paul stuff is basically out the window. As much as I appreciate it, I don't think any of those mindsets can even help us going forward.
Just real quick, Drew, do you agree with that or no? Yes or no? Before Yakov keeps going.
I would just caveat that by saying probably the only thing that I would say is that whether it's a question of efficacy, and I think in a way that he's right that Ron Paul is as principled as he wasn't necessarily effective in the end, right?
Well, we have a comment from Randy Lenz who says, "Who was better in the debates, Ron Paul or Trump?"
Trump, because the debate's not about what information you get, right? It's about like how many zingers you get in, and Trump was nailing them, and it was beautiful. But it's like now, like it's clear it's not about. There was a time when I thought it was about educating people. I don't think it's about that anymore. It's like how many people can you like trick into doing the right thing because they're never going to do it for themselves. And that's kind of what Trump was doing, and that totally failed too. And like talking about the Tea Party element in Trump, like it was just co-opted and then used for establishment goals basically. Yeah, I think what happened to Ron Paul was a lot like what happened to Bernie Sanders, and the well-intentioned old man is never going to get in there. We're looking at bad times.
Well, when it comes to these bad times, there was a documentary that NG Tyler, who's going to be joining us shortly, I believe, he sent this documentary to me called Belly of the Beast. I don't know if you guys have heard of this documentary or not. Drew, have you heard of it or no? So
Possibly, there's probably a few things named that.
So
What's it about?
it's by Justin and Wes Fall, Belly of the Beast, and I have not seen the whole thing yet. But what it basically talks about, it's pretty interesting. It talks about how, according to them, the United States itself, like not just like this deep state that we talk about, but since its actual inception, was a project to resurrect kind of like the idea of like the new Atlantis, to resurrect the idea of this philosophically based society that would kind of rule the world and set a certain standard for everybody else to follow. And what's interesting to me about that is they were also talking about the Mark of the Beast system from Revelation, how that also talks about there being this one world government system that everybody is subject to. And they also talked about how the freedom of religion that was established in the United States, that was something that gave room for a lot of secret societies to be able to flourish and to do things without the prying eyes of the civilians. And I don't know, there's a lot of interesting things that they pointed out. For example, they talked about the prayer for the resurrection of Osiris that they say goes on at the exact same time as the inauguration of the next president, and how what they're trying to do is, at the end of days, so to speak, resurrect this Osiris or Apollo figure who would then reign over this world government system. Now, I'm taking a lot of leaps by saying all of these things because, again, I haven't really dug deep into the paperwork to see whether the conclusions that they're coming to are correct. But let's face it, as far as the architecture, as far as the sigils that you could see in Washington, D.C. itself, there were certain things that were planned out. So I guess it's a question of whether you believe these sigils have any power, or whether it's people just trying to be fancy or doing their equivalent of a lucky rabbit's foot, or if things are way more organized when it comes to these kind of rituals and what they end up leading to. So Drew, I'd be curious if you can touch on that, as well as Yakov.
You know, I was at one point in time writing a book on the architecture of Washington, D.C., and I won't tell you too much about it, but I had gone into much greater detail than I had seen anywhere else, because I was using certain types of math formulas to sort of talk about all of this distinguishing numerology that was used everywhere in the city. And it's mind-boggling, and it's so mind-boggling that it would be impossible, especially with the technology that they had available in the 18th century, for one man, Pierre L'Enfant, who publicly is claimed to have who had designed the city, when we know in fact it was tried about 100 years earlier with almost exactly the same design with the city of London after it had burned down. So yeah, there is there are several organizations around during that moment in time as the movement of the Enlightenment starts to gain steam, and many different types of secret societies start to come into order. And I'll tell you that just with the founding of Washington, D.C., and even looking back on it now, you can see that these plans were maintained. And what you're showing there is only a portion of the city that was expanded on, and the ideas that I'm talking about and you see there are expanded on in greater details all the way through the 1950s with the Eisenhower Plan, who Andrew Jackson had the same thing. There's a mythology of Andrew Jackson going to one of the avenues in Washington, D.C. and breaking a gridlock over where the street was going to be. And the story is he threw his cane down on the ground and said, "This is where it's going to be." Well, as you know, basically trying to say that it was sort of chaos that this was brought in. But if you look at the overall plan, it fit in perfectly well with what was already being projected from the earlier diagram. So, you know, there has been for a long time, even preceding the Enlightenment, a series of individuals who were a part of different secret societies, part of different secret government orders, who had ideas about how to create societies. And in that, effectively embedding numerology, mystical systems, whether they're invented on the spot or taken from someplace else. You see this over and over with, especially with societies that become popular, societies that become successful, that there's a foundation there of some sort, whether or not all the rituals that are talked about that you mentioned, the belly of beast, happen. I can't say, because I think a lot of that is speculation in the conspiracy theory circle. There's all kinds of theories out there about what's happening, but what you can actually see with your own eyes should be enough, and in order to tell that story. So yeah, absolutely. We live in a world that's increasingly more ritualized, I think, more than people understand it. And I hope the conversation today, we get to expand on that a little bit more.
Definitely. And Yakov, what would you add to that as far as these different sigils being used in the U.S.? And also, before I forget, another thing that this doc was mentioning was how they found a lot of the same rituals having to do with, let's say, Quetzalcoatl and other, let's say, names for this dragon-like entity that was connected to mystery schools of the Native Americans before the Americans even got here. So they are pointing basically to this thing being really, 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 really old. But anyway, Yakov, take it away.
It's quite clear that the mystery schools put their mark on this land, that this was supposed to be some sort of new Atlantis. Gotten a lot of information about that from Manly P. Hall. I think The Secret Destiny of America, I believe he goes into a lot of those Mesoamerican ideas and how they've carried over. As far as like the architecture and the street plans and all of that stuff, I find it absolutely fascinating. It's clear that every monument, every sigil, all of these things were a ritual just in their building. It makes me wonder, like I look at ritual and I'm kind of conflicted about it. I don't know how much of it is done to reinforce the will, like you go through these motions knowingly through this like arduous task to create something, to kind of bring your bit of God to earth. And I wonder if it's for yourself, if it's psychological to reinforce your will, or if you're actually trying to channel some energy to have some sort of, I want to say, almost psychic or supernatural influence over people, because like that seems kind of whimsical and kind of out there. I want to be kind of skeptical about it, but it's like, why go through all of this if you're not trying to channel some very real energy?
But it's not even just a group of different gods, let's say, that people would summon. For example, if you're living in India, you would want to enlist the help of certain deities to help you through your daily life. You know, you would pray to Indra, you would pray to Shiva, you would pray to Kali Ma, you know, to ward off the bad spirits. But when it comes to specifically what was constructed in Washington, D.C., what I'm very interested in is there was this square that they showed, which was on the roof of the Masonic temple there, where if you add up all the numbers, it would all equal, I believe, to 666, and then it would also equal to 111. I'm not exactly sure, but the point is that there is a specific number ritual that's going on here, which they are associating, again, with like this Apollo, this Osiris, this figure that keeps on being brought up again. And I wonder how close of a connection can we possibly make to the resurrection of this particular figure and these New Testament prophecies talking about this false prophet, talking about this beast, all that. Because it seems like they're both headed in the same direction, and if they're not, could they make things a little bit clearer as far as like, okay, guys, I know you have the Bible, I know you have Revelations that they're talking about this, but our guy isn't that. Our guy is something else. You know, like, could we be a little bit clearer about what exactly is going on as far as this resurrection ritual, whether it's the monument that also adds up to 666, or whether it's the roof, as I mentioned before, the glass-paned roof that is right above all the holy books in the Masonic temple. Like, is this the same person that they're talking about, or what exactly is going on here?
I tend to want to think that that Apollo figure that you're talking about is a metaphor for like the new secular humanist era that I think they're kind of trying to bring about. I do think there are definitely some parallels. Like we see wonders all the time brought about by like these people who we hear rumors about them trying to birth the moon child, and how Prince Harry's the Antichrist and all this sort of stuff. They show us wonders all the time. We see crazy technology. We see crazy things happening in the news, and it's hard to say. It's very hard to say. I want to just be a Christian these days, to be honest. I feel like that would make me sleep better at night. Life would be a lot easier if I could just wait on Jesus to come back. And frankly, if I had some evidence of the Antichrist, I'm right there believing. So,
Drew, what do you think?
I think one of the fallacies of the conspiracy theory movement is the idea of, and I think this is because it's a lot of is embedded with it's culturally with Christian fundamentalism, that there's the idea of the Antichrist coming into being. I don't think that that is the case so much that people are looking to bring forth the ushering of a new era with an individual or the raising of anything. I think people don't understand that the energy that people are bringing forward is active and alive as it is. It's not about looking to the future, it's about the now. We can essentially, with the eyes forward, that, I really don't see that people want to bring forward the Antichrist. And I would actually add to this that I don't think that there is a linear movement from the foundation of this government and the driving the stakes into Washington, D.C., and the current social political movement that's happening right now. I think right now what you're seeing is a destruction of that and a new system being put into place. And I think it's happening all the time. There are competing orders always working at play. It's not just like one system. There's not like one Illuminati necessarily that's pushing forward, right? Like it's a lot of little groups interspersed that are essentially fighting for primacy.
Those little groups, though, they do end up meeting. I'm not sure if they're meeting that often nowadays, but they were meeting at Bohemian Grove. Again, maybe not all of them, but a goodly portion of people did designate that area as the place to meet and participate in the cremation of care ceremony and all that.
That specific order, the Bohemian Grove order, is the Bush family. It's the dynasties that essentially governed the United States from the 1800s on. Not the Bohemian Grove didn't exist in the 1700s. There was something else that happened before that. And even you look at Benjamin Franklin, who was a part of the Hellfire Club in England. But I don't think that they were necessarily related, that like they moved locations from one to the other. I think people were looking for, and I think ultimately people were looking for ritual. People want to have ritual and want to have ritual in their lives, whether it's going to church or being a part of some, being a part of a protest, or and I think people who are more powerful look for deeper rituals to engage themselves with, which is why you see all types of people convening over, whether it's Bohemian Grove, which by the way is only for a certain type of person. But then you have people who were like the Clintons doing their own rituals, right? And then you see Podesta and his island having a space designated for ritual for a certain other type of person, right? And so you have, I think what happens is when you have people who can come in and establish centers for ritual, they can control people who have power. And that's one of the ways that it's being done right now.
Well, let's say you have someone like David Gergen, and he served in the administrations of Nixon, Ford, Ronald Reagan, and Bill Clinton. So already there would be a connection here with someone who's both a Bohemian Grove participant, as David Gergen was, and let's say somebody who's a voodoo aficionado like Clinton was. From his own autobiography, he talked about how much he enjoyed voodoo. And there was a very interesting interview I remember that Alex Jones had with David Gergen, where Gergen was confronted on this Bohemian Grove stuff, and he was like, I disrespect you for breaking this trust. Like he just got really, really serious all of a sudden, and it's like, they're prancing around in these funny costumes, and they're looked to be like something like a human sacrifice. Again, I don't know if there was an actual sacrifice or if it was just a staged, but either way, I see Bohemian Grove as, even though you're right, there are different little organizations out there, that seems to be, just in terms of the sheer number of really famous and connected people that go there. If there was any kind of epicenter to these activities where people would be able to meet up together, regardless of whatever, let's say, branch or division or other separate organization they happen to have, like, I would put my money on that one. But maybe that's putting a little bit too much emphasis on it, as opposed to some other ones that we don't even know about.
Well, how many groups are there, like, vying for power on that level is what I would wonder. You say that Bohemian Grove is just kind of the Bushes and their cabal, but how many cabals are there that can actually compete with that? I would think that a lot of them are kind of have to kiss the ring, at least the ones with influence.
I mean, that's a good question. I think, it's one of those things where you just find out about it later, right? But we see it happen later, right? We do see that Freemasonry existed for some point, and at some point, for people who are in power, no longer the case. People who are presidents, et cetera, no longer have to be a Freemason first, right? You see that a lot of these things do spring up. You just find out about it later, right? You find out about Burning Man after you didn't know about it for years, right? So you're like, oh, I didn't know that there was this thing all these new age hippies were going to in the middle of the desert. But there it is, right? And at least with that one, you have the option, if you have $3,000 or $5,000 to spend on a summer pre-COVID, that you could actually do it. But I think one of the things that you see is that when we're talking about rituals that exist at that level, that are convened at that level, that there are very few people in power, and therefore there are probably very few outlets for people in power, right? It's just one of those things. So, you'll see like, as a result of Epstein and what he had done on his island, which we can leave to speculate because we only have that, but we know that he had, just by looking at his complex, that his space was reserved, at least a part of it was reserved, for some sort of ritual that happened. You see a labyrinth going around on the outside, and the inside, you see, you have a golden parrot that's on the inside of the space that is essentially
two golden parrots.
Oh, there are two? Oh, yeah, that's right. There were two. And had a minaret and all of this, and is essentially probably someplace, you look this stuff up, you can't really see. And what's really interesting from my vantage point is, even all of the research that I've done on mystery schools, et cetera, you can't find a background for many of these things. Like the cremation of care is not something you can really research. Manly P. Hall, for instance, what you brought up, doesn't talk about it at all. So, there's an opportunity, I think, to construct this in a way, just philosophically. Did these rights exist, or were they made up? You know what I mean? Or
the owl has been around forever, and just looking at this image of the replica of Solomon's temple or whatever, I got to think you're sacrificing something with that thing. But the owl is a symbol that's been around forever. That's connected to this temple.
Well, I think that's a parrot.
Care.
Is that? Can we get a close up of that?
Yes.
I always thought it.
It is actually a parrot, but you know what? The entire structure looks pretty shitty. So I think it may have been a discount owl. Like they wanted to find an owl, they couldn't transport it in time or whatever. It's like, okay, fuck it. I'm just gonna go for the parrots. So you see, there are two parrots over here. Then there's also something that looks like Poseidon, like some kind of a weird statue over there on the bottom. So yeah, like a lot of these things, I think, like, people love talking about Moloch. I mean, I love talking about Moloch, Moloch, mo problems. But when it comes to the owl specifically, this is something that I connect to, hold on. It was in my head just before. It was like a whole cult. There was a prostitution cult for her. Who was this lady, the one with the feet?
Vegan.
Go for it?
talking about the Athenian rituals?
Not
Is that
Athenian, no. This was Sumerian. So it was a Sumerian goddess who had owls
Inanna?
next to her. Say that again?
Inanna?
No. Now, oh, here we go. So there was a Burney relief of the Mesopotamian terracotta plaque. Let's see who it's called. So I have her over here, the mother goddess and the owl. I will post a photo of her right here so you guys take a look while I search for her name. I don't know what happened to me, why it's not in my head anymore, what exactly her name is. And this is a huge picture. Here we go. Okay. So this is the picture of her right here. You guys may recognize her. So you see she's got the owls over here. What is her name? What is going on with me today? So anyway, this is her. So you could see two owls and also two other creatures that look like lions, I believe. Oh, Ishtar. I think it's Ishtar. So, or maybe not. I don't know. Like looking
No,
at
I
it,
think you're right.
it is Ishtar?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so Ishtar, it's a really, really old goddess. And what is she the goddess of? And it is Inanna, so you're also right. It's both Inanna and Ishtar. So she is the ancient Mesopotamian goddess associated with love, beauty, sex, war, justice, and political power. That's an important one right there. She was originally worshipped in Sumer and was later worshipped by the Akkadians, Babylonians, and the Assyrians under the name Ishtar. Yeah, there was a whole prostitution cult with her, and she has one of my favorite star designs of all time. This is the Star of Ishtar, and I just want you to look at this thing for a moment and just see how cool of a design is this.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, like I can imagine it being in some Las Vegas-like setting, you know, assuming this star was passed on to us from the antediluvian civilizations. I can imagine this star would have been like lit up in some kind of a Las Vegas setting in Atlantis, you know, just like with all the colors
the
and lights.
illumination.
Yeah, jotting out, and there would have been prostitutes everywhere there, and a lot of good times to be had by all.
So before we get off the topic of the owl, I've always taken the owl to be a symbol of illumination, in that it sees in the dark. You can turn its head around, so it's got a view of all things around it. I'm trying to place it how it fits in with the mother goddess exactly, because the mother goddess is usually like a symbol of nature, nurturing, these sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have Athena too, and Athena was the goddess of wisdom and I think war as well, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm not sure, Drew, are those two things related, Athena and Ishtar, or no?
Yeah, I think they're correlated, and I just want to say about these symbols, probably what's true then is true today, that the graphic designers who made them were underpaid. So let's not forget about these poor souls who had to go through several variations of that star in order for a committee to decide that's the one. I'm sure that wasn't even the best one either, but you know, that's the one that a committee of 12 people could figure out.
Well, you're bringing up a very important point here, which I'm still torn on. That is one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that a lot of these symbols are generated by the mind. So, for example, when I meditate, I also see like certain structures forming, especially like if I'm dreaming, then I would see like actual letters being projected to me. And that goes to the idea that, you know, this is all vibration, and that these letters that people use and design, as you could say, maybe they weren't things that people just haphazardly came up with, but they were things that were projected into the mind from, you know, who knows exactly where, and then people taking those projections and putting them down into stone or into any other medium. Those are the things that ended up being passed down as the letters, as symbols that are really well known. So I'm curious what you guys think of this. This is kind of like more of a Plato's theory of forms take as far as us all being symbols. Like, my face is a symbol, everything is a symbol. But like, the more you go up the structure of, let's say, into the astral realm, then the more these symbols would resonate as like very particular and very perfect looking elements that we would then take and make designs based on. So I don't know, Yakov, why don't you start? What's your thought regarding the
I
symbology?
I think I can get a little bit of primordial wisdom out of that symbol. You have, the point in the center. You kind of have a target going on, and if you look in if you look in Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike, will go over a lot of like Masonic symbolism. I think one of the first ones is the target, and it's supposed to be like the often taken as the sun, but more like the origin of life, like the point in which all of material reality emanates. And I kind of get that from this. You have the point in the center, and you have the points coming out with kind of arrows in them. It looks kind of like a chaos star, which is the same kind of thing. I think that the whole motif of the point coming outward, that's something you see a lot in like mystery schools and just in graphic design in general. I think we kind of gravitate towards that kind of stuff, the symmetry and all of that.
Well, it's something that you also see a lot in, or at least I see a lot in my own meditations. So when I
Sure.
would meditate, I would see this, and this is probably like the 40th time I've talked about this, but I would see like sometimes even a 5-pointed star, but generally speaking, I would see the following image that I'm going to post for you guys right now. So as you could see over here, I'm not sure why exactly it's not loading anymore. Oh, here we go. So I would see this. So the circles in the periphery, ignore those for a minute, because those, like, you could barely see those, but they're like spinning around. The thing that I want to concentrate a lot more on is what is going on here in the center. So in the center, we do have like a cross, like a shining star thing, out of which you see these little circles. These little circles would form different shapes. So if you have these circles arranged 1, 2, 3 like a triangle, it would form a triangle, either right side up or upside down. So like Shiva, Shakti, and it would also form like a DNA helix. It would form, the shapes haven't gotten that advanced as of yet, but the idea is that this is something that is able to emanate from it different shapes and different ideas, but ultimately it goes back to this, like, we are all one thing. The third eye, the crown, Kater, this point out of which everything emanates from. And I think that this is something that, at least in my own experience, since I was able to actually see it in my mind's eye, I can now, when approaching a lot of these different symbols that either are used by the Freemasons or are used by any other mystery schools, it's understandable to me what is going on here, more or less, but that's just my own perspective, and I'm curious on what you guys think in relation to this idea of getting these things through the meditative process. So, Drew, what do you think?
Well, did you design this, or where did you pull this from?
From my head. I mean, this is something. Oh,
so this is you made this.
Yeah.
You made this. Okay, great.
So
Amazing.
I drew it, but I based it on what was going on inside of my mind when I was meditating. So what you see over here in front of you, it's pretty much what I was seeing dab smack in the center, and pretty much what I see all the time in different variations. It's not always as bright. Sometimes it's duller. Sometimes you got to work your way up to actually seeing this thing in the center. Usually just like lights up, like a light flickering when I get into deeper states of meditation. But it is something that I get it. I understand how this thing works, at least for me. So I wouldn't be surprised that the same process is not occurring for, all these people who are jotting down these different symbols. I mean, even the winged sun, for example. I was at the Russian-Turkish baths, and I went into the cold pool. And I don't know, Drew, have you ever been to the Russian-Turkish baths in New York City?
Yeah, man, it's my favorite.
Yeah, it's my favorite too. And Jakob, if you ever get a chance when New York City gets opened up again, I highly recommend you go there. Anyway, when I was in the Russian-Turkish baths, I went into the cold pool and I was doing the Wim Hof method. When I was sitting there doing the method with the blindfolds on, I started getting what I would call the flashing. By the flashing, I mean it looked like everything was like becoming like flashing black and white, like everything was like slowing down in the vision. But at the same time, I also saw that light, and I saw what looked like wings. And they weren't wings, they were just like kind of like tree branches, but they were extending out from this light. So when I think of the famous symbol that was used both in Zoroastrianism as well as ancient Egypt, as well as the Caduceus, when you have these snakes going up, the Kundalini energy flowing up into the third eye, and then the wings come out. I mean, it's very understandable to me, at least, because I was able to see this thing taking place, how this is something that other people could have also seen. But anyway, that's just my story. But Drew, what do you think?
Plato has an interesting quote about all of this, and I love it because it sort of summarizes this to a large degree. And I can't tell you where this is quoted from, so you'll have to search to find it. The quote goes, and I'm paraphrasing because it's been translated 100 times, I'm sure, and also by myself. That quote, if you take a man before a diagram or a symbol, you can show him quite clearly that learning is simply remembering. And what that means to me is that we have embedded in us a deep innate knowledge or experience with symbols and even knowledge itself or wisdom, where we're in a constant process of revelation, that these are things that we only have to visualize to know deeply. We don't have to be taught too much, that we have sort of an instinct or an active experience happening simultaneously. And there's some interesting modes of thinking that overlie different communities: Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, where there are several universes sort of being projected onto this one. One of them being sort of a symbolic realm, where there's essentially multiple dimensions projecting themselves simultaneously onto this one. And one of them is the symbolic realm that's essentially woven into everything. So I think, with regard to those traditions, absolutely. And I think with even my own experience, you can take psychedelic drugs, you can meditate. I mean, you'll see things, you'll see geometry, and you'll see all of these things, which are, I think, in any other reason unexplainable. Like, why see that? Why do these things come up? And I just think there's sort of a natural repercussion of consciousness being here.
I definitely agree. And even with this shape that you see going on here in this relief that I just posted. So you see over here how there's this winged sun, but then there's also the tail that goes out. One interesting thing that I've been observing regarding the meditation process is one other really common thing is that there is a triangle that ends up going down much like a tail, and it ends up either expanding or ends up just falling down like so. But one thing that I want to make a Twitter thread about later on is how I've been noticing that these are even things that you can notice in your face. So for example, if this is the third eye, these are the wings, and this is the triangle. So our face itself, I think, is an example of this thought, which is the universe, expressing itself. And it's also very interesting to me how the connection, I think, may be between human beings that are able to express themselves versus, let's say, animals which are already in a certain mold. So, for example, if you look at the face of, like, a cat, it's got a very beautiful face, one of the most beautiful animals, I think, of all time, definitely high up there. But it's kind of stuck in what it's able to do, what it's able to project. You know what I mean? Like, it is what it is. It's a cat. But a human being face, like, this is another thing that I had at the Russian-Turkish baths when there was this Hasidic Jewish dude who gave me a kosher joint. There was a time when I was looking at his face, I was high out of my mind. And now all of a sudden I thought, wait a minute, this is so interesting. It's like we're like these bodies with these faces that show our soul. The face itself shows the soul. The face itself is a phrase, is a vibration. And you know what I mean? Like, it's a very trippy moment that I had right there where I was just looking at people's faces and just saying, like, wow, we all have all these different faces that are communicating to us in, like, the way that they're arranged and the kind of expressions that they make. They tell us so much about what exactly is going on here. It is like a language that we just kind of forgot about. And I would say that the face is the same thing as this sacred geometry that gets barfed out of the third eye light when I have these triangles and all these shapes coming out of this light. Well, this is also a part of it. This is the same process that's going on. So I know, like, that is another thing that points me to there being something way more interesting going on here than just randomness. But I'm curious, like, Drew and Yakov, if you have had similar thoughts when it comes to what exactly this face and this body, how exactly it relates to the universe as a whole.
Have you guys heard of Kyle Odom? Kyle Odom, he was a guy who he was doing some meditation. He was going to school. I think he was a veteran. He was going to school for something in the medical field, and he was generally seen as a trusted individual. He was doing some meditation, and he's doing the whole bit where you're focusing on a single point, you're clearing out your mind, all that thing. A blue orb appears before him, and it starts communicating with him. And I don't remember exactly what it said to him, but after that experience, he began to be gang stalked by reptilian humanoids. And he kept thinking they were trying to contact him all the time. He would see people and their faces would change right before him, like their human face was just a hologram and they were revealing himself to him. Eventually, this guy, he got so whacked out. Basically, he was living the plot of They Live. And he ended up going to a church and putting, I think, 9 bullets into a pastor in his back and in his head, who survived. And that's weird that guy even survived that. Ultimately, he was caught throwing USB drives over the fence to the White House, he's trying to tell Obama, it's okay. I understand that the Martians are raping you. And I'm one of the good guys. And I'm talking about this because we're talking about meditation and the symbolism. And it's like, sometimes I feel like I am that crazy. Like, I've done acid, like I've seen the blue orbs. They spoke to me and all of that, So you got to wonder, like, what have other people experienced? Maybe they are holographic reptilians. Maybe that's the problem with the world.
Well, what did they say to you specifically?
To me, they told me they loved me and to go out and inspire.
Oh, that's
only
sweet.
good things.
And Drew, how about yourself as far as these experiences? Can we say that there are certain things that multiple people, if not every person at a certain points, end up meeting the same kind of entities with a similar kind of message? Or is it all just jumbled up, or some of these just playing pranks on people, to get their interdimensional jollies on? Like, how concrete can we portray what exactly is going on as far as certain things that are shared by tons of people in terms of visions? Not even, because we already talked about the sacred geometry. I'm talking about specifically, like, hi, Mr. Entity, what do you have to say? Well, I have to say yada yada yada, and and you could take that to the bank, Mister. So I don't know. What do you think? Are there things like that in common with people?
Well, I think that there's definitely understanding that in different states of consciousness that people see different things, right? The Terence McKenna DMT gnomes are much different than the Buddha dragon, right? So I think what we can see is very clearly is that the human mind, soul, or consciousness can project itself into different types of realities, that it can manifest not just in this body, but co-manifest or unmanifest in this one, even in some cases, and incarnate into some other realm, right? Which I think is pretty cool, pretty fucking terrifying, depending on what state you're in and how ready you are to accept it. Whether that's the case after we leave our bodies that we experience these things is entirely another question. So, from my vantage point, I look at all of these different traditions, all of these different stories, people who are delivering all kinds of different messages. And I would say that if you're taking all of them for their word, and that what they experience actually did exist, that there are just like multiple universes that we can spring up in and witness different things. And in that same right, I think that it's interesting that a lot of people who do DMT all seem to see the gnomes, right? A lot of people who do meditation, different types of meditation, will see something specific to that, or the blue orbs when you're taking LSD, or whatever. So I think it's all kind of interesting that it's people are having these similar experiences based on the practice that they undertake.
But the blue orbs, when people see those, would they be located in the same place as my light was, or would they just be floating about wherever? Like, what is the construction? What is the architecture that's going on with those particular visions?
Well, not necessarily, right? I mean, it's just because something is of similar sort doesn't necessarily mean it's of similar origin, right? And I think you have, like, especially when you're talking about what our mind's eye can see, there are very limited amounts of shape. An orb is a circle or a sphere. Like, there got to be a lot of those sitting around, not just one, not just all like from the sphere store from Dimension X, right? That these like, you know, so we're talking about like the human mind, what it can see, the language of the universe, and that comes up in a number of different ways, right? So we have geometry, and you have very specific sorts of geometry. You have platonic solids primarily as the manifest form of geometry in this planet, and what people tend to see when they undergo some sort of mental transformation, whether it's meditation or whatever. Circles, concentric circles, any kind of shape that emanates from a point. But then you have characteristics, deeper symbols, which you're talking about, like the caduceus, for instance, where they take an archetypal form. And that's a different thing than a materialized geometric form, because the geometric form has to do with the construction of matter, material, and the formation, the summation of every manifested reality, right? Then you have the archetypes, where you get into the caduceus, etc. Any kind of thing that is like a little bit more of a complicated diagram. And I would put into this the circle with the point. All of these things, those have to do with, those get into like theories of manifest consciousness, right? Like what organizing manifest consciousness in a certain point of a cycle, right? You start talking about existing in time. And then you have, I think, like character or personality injections from different archetypal energies in the universe, where you get the gnomes, where you get the sphere that will commune with you and have a dialogue with you. And I would separate them into these sort of categories to say that, like, these are all different like modalities and how we can experience them. Even between all of those, you have different layers that you can essentially find yourself in, project yourself in, or whatever.
So I kind of wanted to ask, like, are you experiencing yourself? Are you rediscovering yourself, or are you discovering things outside of you? And it sounds like what you're saying is that it's a bit of both, and it's case by case, or.
Well, I mean, it's just how you define the self, right? So,
I suppose.
You know, I guess it's like, okay, is the self the ego, like the manifestation of a single humanoid with a lifetime experience, or is it like when you talk about Tibetan Buddhism, the cycle of God consciousness weaving itself through every possible human being, that we're all essentially sprung from each other, right? And so I think that's where you start getting into, like, you know, what memory is, what you're actually experiencing, what reality you're experiencing on it, and that's kind of what I'm asking, like, what's the definition of the self?
Well, what's interesting is that we have a comment here from Randy Lenz, who says it's like, oh, and before I even say this, subscribe for those who have not subscribed yet. We got a good amount of people here, 36 people watching. Make sure to subscribe, and also make sure to go to patreon.com/breaktherules with a 3, and if you become a patron, then you are going to get a beautiful print from Gio Pennichetti, Japanese wood block print, limited time offer. And one other thing is that if you want to contribute to us, help us grow, support us by going to streamlabs.com/lovejules, which you will see on the lower right corner of the screen. I'm going to paste this into the chat as well. And you could also use crypto. So if there are any crypto millionaires that are watching this right now, this would be the time to give us some crypto, and whatever you write is going to be displayed on the screen, and we will address it. So anyway, going to Randy's comment, it's like if I hold my breath until I nearly pass out, the edges of my vision become blurry because this happens to others. Does this suggest some kind of transcendent phenomenon occurring? Not convinced. And Bulat Usmanov says, how about common neurological structure instead? LOL. So one thing that I would quickly add to that to address that comment is I got to the point where, I mean, even having just like a light at the exact center that triangles come out of, already you're not really talking about like the structure of the human brain. You may be talking about the way it would perceive shapes, but you're not exactly talking about the way that the brain and the synapses look. So it's not like you're seeing something that's like squishy and based in our solid reality. The other thing that I would add to that is that I got to the point where when I lie down on the bed before going to sleep, and I was not asleep yet, like I was fully awake, this area over here, like the center third eye area, it started gyrating like a little motor, like drrrr. And when that happened, I started to get a zoetrope effect of what looked like a three-dimensional, no, it was like a three-dimensional dome-like structure, which I can zoom in, zoom out, I could rotate it, I could basically have a three-dimensional, like Maya, program in my mind that I was able to move around. So there is definitely a relationship here between seeing a structure and being able to manipulate it, which also comes into play with even just like lights. So I would have like a purple light and a blue light, not light, but like a vortex, and I can like move them around based on, do I want the purple light to be on the left or the right? So when I move them, they would just like slowly start to change. And I'm really fascinated by that kind of relationship too. So it isn't just like, oh, like you put pressure on your eyes and then you see some after effects. There is a relationship going on here between what you are seeing, how you're able to manipulate it, but also advanced structures being able to be generated without the use of any psychedelics. But anyway, that was my 2 cents on that.
I'd like to go back to the self thing I had to think about that for a second, because you're not often asked to define self, and it's not easy to do, apparently. But so we're talking about like interacting with things in these altered states. So like Drew, one could say that talking to you, I am discovering a part of myself. We could get that esoteric with it, but practically speaking, we are two distinct consciousnesses. Just, you know, for the sake of understanding. So these things that you might encounter in altered states, like, are they distinct consciousness in that sense, or?
Sorry, can you ask the question again? I'm not, can you just say that?
Yes. So I'm trying to define self as, like, practically speaking, me as a separate consciousness from you. We could get very esoteric. We could say that me interacting with anybody is me discovering another part of myself, and we're all one. We could do that thing. But like, when you encounter seemingly a separate intelligence in these altered states, is it often something as distinct as you are from I? Or is it a part of me that I am encountering? Yeah,
I want to preface this what you're asking and what was being asked in the comments. Firstly, like with respect to the comments, I have to apologize. I'm not going to try to convince anybody of anything. That's really not what I'm interested in doing. Rather, overall, what I'm interested in doing is sort of giving a context about not necessarily what I think, but what I've learned from studying different cultures. So, you know, I'm not gonna try to assert my own opinions on anything here. But I think what's more interesting is building inferences from collective experiences from people all across the world, who have all across time, as far back as I can get it. So, you know, with respect to what you're saying, I think, you know, it's you know, there's so many different ways to look at it, and one of them could be that, you know, we're here in these bodies, and why we're here, you know, what exactly we're doing here in these bodies. And I think one of them could be that we're here to learn, right? We're here to see our divine selves, and without seeing manifestly all of these different variations of all of these, you want to call them higher or other selves, that we would, as whatever little gods or whatever you want to call them, that we would have the ability to do that. So I think, you know, it's an interesting way to look at it.
The structure of the caduceus, by the way, that you were talking about, I don't see it as being something that's far away from our own human body, because it's like the spinal cord with the wings that are spreading out in the same area that I was describing. and the interweaving of the snakes, that's like the Kundalini process. So this is also something that I could see reflected in ourselves as a symbol. Now,
Yeah, I mean, I think the caduceus is an interesting symbol because it essentially is a Western symbol coming from the Greeks, but it corresponds to Hindu mythologies where you talk about the number of different entry points of energy, the Ida Pingala going up the spinal cord, and how it ultimately fruits in the top into this higher realm of consciousness. And I think there's what's interesting about symbolism, and I think what one of the proofs of life, so to speak, of like what really interests me to continue on this is you can see almost no matter where you go across the planet that people have the same methodologies, sometimes the same symbols they're using, even though they're not necessarily connected geographically, which says to me that there's sort of like a higher principle that's going on here, that there's something, it's not just like a hallucination from people eating lead paint. It's that because people weren't painting with lead paint everywhere, that there is some uniformity in consciousness as it pertains to people's collective experiences. So I would say this is like what's really interesting to this is how collectivism can be built, the modalities can be built into the collective experiences, and how this relates to essentially demonology, if we want to go into our the topic of conversation, and how how historically these mythologies, these types of energies have been injected into the symbolism at almost every level of every major culture. And I think there's a reason for that, and there's a reason why you can see it pop up everywhere.
so the image that I just posted right now, this God self image of holding these two animals, there's also a similar thing going on here with something like the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, for instance, where just like in Masonry, you would also have these two columns, the column of severity and the column of mercy, and in the way the figure that's holding these two animals is balancing it all out, yet these are all from different cultures. I mean, as far as the Kabbalah itself, like when was the earliest known use of that thing? Because that's, I mean, they say that it's really, really old. It may be, but as far as the archives that we have, it's like from the Middle Ages, right? Like this Kabbalistic Tree of Life. Something older would have been the thing that I posted earlier, the Mesopotamian tree with those birdmen holding the pine cones right next to it with the winged sun right above it. And there's a similar structure there too, like Keter, the crown, the winged sun, from which goes down like this structure with different parts, different chakras, all interconnected like a tree. Like it's all very similar what's going on here. And now I also want to hear from Vincent, who's joined us recently. Vincent, how are you? Vincent, can you hear us?
Yeah, sorry. I had to unmute myself. What's up?
What's up? So we're going to be talking about the demonology pretty soon. I want to get NG Tyler here as well to talk about it with us. He's really big into that. But what are your thoughts so far on the conversation that we've been having in relation to this symbolism?
Well, I just joined like maybe 5 minutes ago, so I'm a little out of the loop. If you could just TLDR me real quick.
Sure. So we're basically talking about how this actually, Yakov, why don't you explain what exactly we're talking about? I got to get a drink.
Well, basically, the Freemasons showed up in the New World, and they said this was the new Atlantis. And now we're all just jogger cattle, and they're herding the jogger cattle. Basically, there are cabals at play. They are trying to, I don't know, they're trying to shape the people's opinion and the current of society and time itself. I'm not actually sure, man. I could get real Illuminati with this, but Drew's takes are a lot better.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that goes without saying. I feel like you don't even have to look that much further than the most superficial news out there to recognize what's happening. But oh, by the way, Yakov, I've been listening to the Skinwalker Tapes podcast for like the past 2 weeks because I just discovered you because you're on the show.
Hell
Super
yeah.
sick. But
Thanks.
Yeah, but no, yeah, for sure. I feel like it's also really, well, I mean, I don't know if y'all talked about it, but the Epstein shit coming out into the light really, I feel like that really red pilled a lot of people on the reality of these kinds of like occult, demonic, satanic, whatever you want to call it, forces out there that run shit behind the scenes.
I would love to think so. The whole Epstein thing has fucking blackpilled me into oblivion. I have been destroyed by it. The fact that everybody can agree that pedophiles run the world for all of like a month or whatever. Then they kill the guy 2 weeks later. The what? The pedo what's? Who runs the world? The what did Israel do? And like, dude, now Ghislaine is still locked up apparently, but like, who cares? It doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter.
No, yeah,
You know,
they're just
they
gonna.
released the Finders information, 300 pages about how the CIA is trafficking children for blackmail purposes. It's like, it don't matter.
No, yeah, they're just gonna move on to whatever the next hot topic is, and no one's gonna bring it up for a while.
By the way, Ye Boy says, "Damn, Lev's hair looking great. What product you using, boy?" I'm going to bring the product here later on to show you guys. It's a good hair product. I actually had a dream a couple of days ago that I had really good hair. You know, that my hair was like all flowing and everything, and it felt really good. So it's interesting how that's coming into fruition. But I do want to get back, before we get deeper into the demonology aspect of it, like, if we were to have, like, look, like Drew, I consider you somebody to be more, maybe I'm wrong here, but more of an inside person than many other people who I would have known, just because you are in, I mean, you're in co-masonry, which is a part of Freemasonry, but you are also someone who's always been very interested by the symbolism, by what happens behind the scenes. When it comes to these kind of things, I really wish to have a conversation with, like, I don't know, like David Gergen, or whoever, you know, whoever is like a high up person in various mystery school traditions, and be all like, okay, like, you're a good guy, like, you seem to not want, you know, bad things to happen to people. Let's just be open. Like, what is this? What's going on here? Like, when it comes to, is this just humanism? Is this just like the deification of man through the symbolic structures? And this is kind of like what we were talking about before, but Vincent's here as well, so I would love for him to also input on this. Is this just the deification of man through the symbol usage? Or is there, again, like within some of these mystery schools, would there be room to, let's say, have there be certain magic that would be used for not just good luck, not just like a giant good luck charm, but for certain people to, let's say, I believe Aryan Cowboy was talking about this in the previous stream, certain people who would rise to the occasion to become avatars of a certain concept, of a certain ideas, who would then become the next leader, the next world leader, the next, you know, because these people are also, like in the documentary, there were people in there, like in the UN and different organizations, who didn't have that much of a problem with there being some kind of a boss, some kind of a world CEO, somebody who would set things right. It's not something that's just like in the fringe. This is something that people talk about. So I'm basically trying to see if there is anywhere we could possibly get here with the information you were able to get that goes beyond just, oh, this whole 666 monolith thing, it's all just like a big good luck charm, and it's something that elevates all these people who know about it to a higher state of consciousness. Is there something even more behind that that could possibly be grasped, or we don't know, and there's no way to know right now?
I'm gonna. Can I just? I want to jump in here, because I have experience with what you're saying on a lot of different levels. One is years ago, I was doing music videos for some very popular musicians, some of which, many of which are considered a part of the Illuminati, some of which have claimed to be a part of the Illuminati, or, you know, have done various things that pertain to it. And I was, on several occasions, even more recently, I was going to work on a certain music video. I'm not going to say who's who or what's what, particularly because I'm contractually obligated not to. and I don't want to be sued into oblivion for any reason. But there have been asked, and I know a lot of people are asked to do this, to insert certain types of symbols into the video. Okay. All right. Images that have to do with the occult, that have to do with the Illuminati. Okay. That's one thing. But as a result of being asked that question, I asked the question because I know how to do this. What symbols and what story do you want to tell? And the answer was always, I don't know, just the symbols. Okay, but what type of system are you trying to integrate? You want to bring this in? You want to talk? These people have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. Not even the slightest clue. Like they're so busy looking at power in the face and ideating what supreme power looks like that they don't see. They're blinded by a single point. And I think that's probably true for the majority of the people who are a part of any mystical order, whether it's something that is just, whether it's Sufism. There's a lot of people who they just don't get it. Freemasonry is especially true. You see this with Freemasons everywhere. All of the brothers in Freemasonry that I've met, they're in it for the brotherhood. They don't understand the symbols. And so I think that I would put people into three categories, human beings into three categories. There are, one is the border of the initiates and the non-initiates. The non-initiates are playing by the initiates rules, but inside the initiated, there is a very, very few number of people who actually understand what's going on in those systems. And I would even say that, like, when you get even to the highest levels, even like whatever you talk about the Bushes, or even the whatever, you go all the way up even further past them to the whatever Rothschilds, Rockefellers, or whatever, I would even bet that they don't understand the systems either. But there are people who have interred and manifested those systems that understood what those systems were to some degree. And those are the people who were essentially illuminated by some vision somewhere, or otherwise borrowed it from someplace else or constructed it from some other reality. But I think that you'll see that this is the case, that most people, 99.99 even percent of human beings, don't understand the system at all. And even a lot of the ones that spend a lot of time talking about them.
Interesting. I could imagine myself like going up to the Masonic Temple in Washington, D.C. and being all like, hey guys, can't wait till we resurrect Osiris, huh? Huh? Isn't that going to be fun? And like most of them are just going to be looking stupefied at me. What the hell is this person talking about? When, again, like that is just like one thing that I'm just using as an example because of the documentary, because they were making, and for those who are not aware, coming in late, the documentary I'm talking about is called Belly of the Beast, and you could see that on Vimeo, Belly of the Beast Director Cut by Fourth Watch Films. So in the description there, this is what they say. Everybody, please subscribe. No, they say, is the United States of America, by design, set to fulfill an ancient esoteric prophecy charted by mystics of ages past? For thousands of years, mystery religions and diverse occultists have shrouded prophecies of a great continent of the Western Hemisphere that would become the catalyst of the final world kingdom. This globally sovereign empire would lead the entire world into an age of spiritual enlightenment, posturing itself as a true utopia, while it ushers in a revival of ancient magic rites, as well as a return to the worship of old gods and goddesses. So that is, they're talking about Lucifer, they're talking about, Lucifer as the light bringer, and I'm kind of conflicted. Because on one hand, and we have Gravantis here, which is perfect for this conversation. On one hand, I can see that there are all these eras where we have, and Gio's entering here as well, perfect. There are all these eras where we have a revival of art. For example, the Renaissance. What was also accompanied during the Renaissance? The revival of a lot of these paganistic influences. I mean, you see them in art, like all the old gods are resurrected. While if you look at the time before, I mean, Gravitas, I love you, but that time was full of these very judgmental-looking icons of saints who were looking down at the people, and, you know, it wasn't necessarily a time of high technology either. Like, there were diseases that people were dying from prematurely and all that. So it's like you have this Promethean tendency to, and Prometheus, by the way, not only did he steal the fire of the gods in this, the Greek mythology having to do with Prometheus being the creator of human beings and stealing the fire of the gods, which I think is Kundalini, and giving it to them, but also Prometheus, it means to see ahead, to see forward. And when we're talking about science and we're talking about technology, this is something that is very present in us, where we end up having a certain deification in terms of the capability for us not just to sit around and go by a certain ordered system with all the human problems it possesses, but to be able to go beyond that, to create the airplane, to create the space shuttle, to create all of these things, while at the same time, again, space shuttle, NASA, Jack Parsons, who was a disciple of Aleister Crowley, like it all seems to go back and is connected to a lot of these pagan rites. So it's almost like you can't really have one without the other, where paganism is in a way a representation of human beings being able to participate in the process of creation. But that is my long-winded way of coming to this part of the conversation before we get to demonology, which is, how do you guys see this coalescing together of Renaissance influence, of technology, high art, while it also has these other spectral influences from this more daimonic pagan realm? So, Gravitas, I would love for you, you're joining us right now, thank you so much for being here, to give some info on what you think is going on here with this connection, and then for everybody else to also answer.
Yeah, I kind of see the this renaissance of technology and kind of the blending of it. It's, man from the beginning has always attempted to, I guess, ascend to divinity in some manner or regard. And I think this is just the latest way that man kind of sees that ascent. You see this like the transhumanist, this almost sense of like merging with a machine or something, this idea of like almost capturing your consciousness. And, I think it's foolhardy. I don't think that, just on the basis that, a machine's ever going to elevate man. But I think it can very much sort of enslave man, where we become so dependent on this technology where, it's almost the irony where we see ourselves kind of ascending to this higher level by attaching ourselves to the technology. But in the real sense, we're becoming so dependent on it. And I guess that's kind of how I see that interplay between the two.
Well, you're focusing right now, which is a very valid criticism of technology that I also had, but it's slightly different from the premise here, I think, which is, while technology being able to overpower the individual is one thing, what I'm referring to here more is the ability of humans to generate from within the power to create this technology or any other technology, to be able to have more of a power over themselves and over the nature that's around them, like not yet going into the phase you just described of becoming a slave to the technology, but the actual impulse to do that. I see somebody send a chart over here, what Lev believes. There's like all this dark age over here when Christianity comes. I mean, look, if we're talking about Christianity, I'm sure it wasn't that bad in certain places. I'm sure it was really nice. But you gotta admit, though, that when it came to any kind of Renaissance, like the Iranian Renaissance or the Renaissance that we had in Europe, there was this convergence of all these old esoteric beliefs of these old gods. Now, whether they just hitched themselves along for the ride, that's a valid way of looking at it. I'm not sure, because it seems like whenever we're talking about technology, the people who are at the very top, like Isaac Newton, for example, he was always dabbling in alchemy. Or somebody like Nikola Tesla was also interested in a lot of these things. The idea that this whole universe is this thought processes going on. So I just think it's a natural thing that once people open themselves up to more knowledge, to being able to affect the world, even in a positive sense, then it's going to go hand in hand with a lot of these pagan things resurfacing. So I'm curious if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely the impulse. We see that those kind of more creative types, I would say they definitely have a more spiritual aspect to them. I mean, just speaking biblically or something, the first mention of something like being filled with the Holy Spirit is when they're creating like the Ark of the Covenant, where it's an artist inspired. And I think that, goes throughout any sort of culture or history where there's this impulse to create. It's just, I guess it's easy to get sort of like taken too far and getting carried away in that sense. At the end of the day, whether it's art or sort of like technology or some regard, I think it speaks to like a greater truth in which we're able to, I guess, show humanity's creative side. But it could also, on the other hand, be taken too far to that kind of like that destructive impulse as well. And I think the interplay between the two is something to also look at.
And how about yourself, Drew, when it comes to seeing this interplay between technology and a lot of these pagan elements resurging at the same time, along the line of having these people like Jack Parsons and so on and so forth? How do you view this connection?
I think it's like theoretical, right? There's a really interesting interplay that I think with technologies and how they can be correlated to mystical technologies before that, right? So if you talk about the internet, for instance, you can talk about psychism, you can talk about how whatever, you can come up with a number of different ways to sort of interplay them. And what's interesting to me, I think, whether it's mystical or not, that there's technology is essentially a way to format certain concepts mechanically or through material, right? And I think this is like, but this is also the difference between technology and the spiritual, right? They're manifestly opposite in terms of what they're composed of. One is completely material. The other one is completely immaterial, right? So it's interesting to me that on either side of this, you can correlate one to the other and draw lines and connections between how one essentially is like the other, even though they're made of completely different. One is, whether you think it's abstract or an idea or real, etheric or whatever, whether it's invented or not, regardless, there is a technology that you can essentially look at and say, this is something like the Hindus talked about. This is something like, but it's just made out of material, right? So I think that just looking at it sort of like the correlation to that, and if that's true, and if it is true, the fact that there is a correlation, and what's interesting, there's this Sufi, there's a Sufi lecture that I really like to look at, and he draws the line in saying, look, like everything that is technological is brought about by the jinn, right? This is the jinn is basically where the word genie comes from. In Persia, they had the idea, or essentially this is pre-Mohammedan ideas, but their idea is like there's an elemental being that lives out in the desert, essentially is composed, it lives in the sand and grants wishes or does certain deeds, or essentially works with electricity and sand, right? And it's been formatted in different ways throughout the year through metaphysics. But then you have technology coming out, and with this Sufi teacher is talking about is sort of the correlation between that and saying, look, technology for the most part right now is made out of silica. It's made out of sand, made out of glass. And the transmission of different ideas and calculations is essentially made of electricity and sand. So what he's saying is that, look, the jinn essentially lives in computers. everything that you want, the computer does for you. So this is exactly the same thing as the genie, right? The genie will do things for you, but the more and more you use the genie, the more and more the genie owns you. The more that it does for you. And this gets into the sort of the same thing as this Faustian type of concept, where Faust is working with this demon, and the more he works with this demon, the more the demon owns him. But then you can see this is true with technology as well. And how many people their lives are completely governed by their addiction to technology. Every wish is granted toward them, but how little they have right now, how people feel like that their lives are so miserable right now, even though we live in a moment in time where we have more than anybody materially that had ever existed before us. So this is sort of correlation I'm looking at. It's I think there's a direct connection between these stories of metaphysics and how we're experiencing technology right now.
I want to add before I get to NG Tyler, who is joining us right now, a comment from Info Warlock. Jinn derived from genie, genie derived from genius, which also means daimon, aka demon. And this is something that I've always been fascinated by, this idea of this in-between area, neither good nor bad when it comes to demons, fairies, these beings that people have encountered throughout the ages. There is a very interesting book I'm going to link to called Daimonic Reality by Patrick Harper, which talks about exactly this. Daniel Pinchbeck recommended this book to me when we had him on, and it is a very interesting book that talks about how even for, let's say, the Christians, when it comes to the Virgin Mary sightings, these areas where they found the Virgin Mary was an area which was before occupied by some fertility goddess, and there really is no differentiation between this young woman that was seen by the pagans and what they ended up calling the Virgin Mary. And this is not a Virgin Mary that stabbed anyone in the back, for all I know. You know, like, these entities, they seem to, as far as, like, the fairy myths, they're always really nice to children, you know, like they don't do any bad things. So when it comes to this idea of the spectral realm that is not a realm most people are privy to, yet it also exists, where exactly lies, and with art too, because like the Muses, for example, in ancient Greek, who inspire art. Like, this is not a realm of just sitting and praying to God and that's it. This is a realm of, as a human being, creating something, so I don't see that as being necessarily evil. But I am still interested in whether even something like that also leads to whatever may be going on right now, according to the documentary that Tyler happily shared with me that I am still halfway into watching, Belly of the Beast. This is the third time I'm talking about it. But yeah, Tyler, can you talk a little bit about the Belly of the Beast, because you saw the whole thing, and whether it would also relate to, because you are an artist as well, so whether it would also relate to the idea of human beings being able to create art, and where you see the limit is between that and this much more malevolent result that the documentary talks about. Can you hear us? I can't hear you right now. Nope. You got to get your sound on. I know, it happens sometimes. So work on your sound. While you're working on the sound, I would love to ask the exact same thing to Graventus, and then we got Gio joining as well, and Yakov and everybody. So Graventus, your take on what I just said.
Well, I think that the modern, the Christian reaction to that is to, I guess, be shocked. There's this pagan like idea or something, but that the early Christians, when they went in to evangelize, what they purposely did was found sort of any sort of similarities between whatever pagan practices they have, and to say, Christ is the fulfillment of this. You have some sort of resurrecting figure, you have some sort of virgin that that plays an important role. Here's the fulfillment of this in Christianity. And a lot of these old pagan temples or whatnot, whether they're dedicated to like some sort of healing figure or like a fertility goddess or something, the idea of that Christianity wasn't to destroy like this temple or whatever. It was to convert it into the Christian idea of it. So yeah, no, it's definitely that there are those, you know, elements, the seeds throughout, you know, whatever culture, whatever belief system it is. And, you know, from the Christian perspective, it's bringing out and emphasizing those elements that they have in common with Christianity. Not that there's some sort of hodgepodge that gets scrambled together to this, or like it's all blended together or something, but rather that finding the common elements and bringing them out and emphasizing like, here's Christ fulfillment in them.
Well, even if you would go beyond, let's say, the moment I think you would go beyond saintly iconography as far as art forms, they have a lot of beautiful iconography behind you, but the moment that you get beyond that and just create something else, I think that is the moment where this influence of the daimon, the genius, ends up coming into you, where you are kind of like making something else that is not something you would find in nature. Thus, we did have a lot of iconoclasm back in the day, which ended up destroying anything else. But this is something that I really want to touch on, because as someone, like, I'm also in animation, I also create things, and so does Tyler. So Tyler, I think your mic is working now.
Is it working? Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay,
I can.
God, that was
Yes.
embarrassing.
No problem at all. Everybody subscribe
man.
right now for Tyler getting his microphone to work finally. So Tyler, can you talk about, well, first in general, just like that documentary, because you watched the whole thing, and we were talking, I don't know if you were privy to our conversation before. You weren't.
No,
Okay,
I'm
that's
coming in
fine.
the deep end.
That's fine. So how would you describe what exactly the conclusion is that this documentary is making? Let's just start from there before getting too complicated.
All right. I don't know if there's any way to talk about without making it complicated, but I'll try my best. So, like, you guys, what you said was very eloquent, and I'll probably touch on all of that stuff. But I don't know if any of you guys have watched The Belly of the Beast. I don't know if Lev has shown it to you.
Into half of it.
Okay. Yeah, you should definitely check it out when you're done. Very interesting documentary. It goes into all sorts of the pagan worship that you find around DC, like all the monuments, where they come from, the origins of them, what they point to, and just like the strange, I guess from our perspective, it's strange, but just like what symbols, what beliefs you find just all around DC that kind of make up, well, I guess you could say our architects or founders, or even, I guess, shadow government believes in. So I'm going to talk about that a lot too. So there's this book, Shadow Men. I don't know if any of you have read it. I talked about it last time. It makes the assertion that like the enemies of America, like all the demon stuff we talk about, it's their religion. Like all the symbols that they believe in, that's whether or not they're true. I think they're true, but I don't know if they're true, but it's the symbols of their religion. So, and if you want to contrast that with like the Christian American Western perspective, we have to start. So this is about demons. So if we're going to start with demons, we have to talk like, what is a demon? From the Christian perspective, the Bible talks about the Nephilim, and then from there you have the Book of Enoch, which extrapolates on it. I know it's not accepted, but if you go into Enoch, you find a lot of things about Nephilim, and what we find is like the rebellious angels of God, not like the angels that are obedient to God, but the angels that are disobedient to God, the fallen angels. Their offspring, and then the fallen angels, when they die themselves, their spirits are disconnected from source. They roam the abyss. The dead spirits, they're no longer connected to God. The roaming spirits become demons. And the idea is like those demonic spirits are called upon. This perspective gives way to the idea that the demons are those pagan gods, like masquerading as like benevolent gods. And then Belly of the Beast kind of ties all of this together. It talks about like who the Shadow Men, as referred to in the book Shadow Men, definitely check it out. But it refers to them as kind of the belief system of the enemies of the West. So like, I have that perspective. Like, I don't like the enemies of the West. I have a very Christian perspective as Gravantis. Is that how you say it? Gravantis? That's what you were just saying. So like you kind of stole my thunder before I started, but like that's how I see it. So I think it's like our metaphysical beliefs versus their metaphysical beliefs. Whether or not they're true, they're profoundly like impactful on what we believe. God, I just said a lot of words.
Well, we should also, by the way, I know you're watching this right now, Aryan Cowboy. Your expertise on this matter would be very imperative, because this is somebody who is very deep in the lore of a lot of these Vedic belief systems when it comes to like Indra and all these other entities. And again, like if I'm looking at something like, just as a quick aside, it's like Shiva and Kali. These are abstract concepts for like Shiva is like the destroyer. Now, I don't imagine like some angry demon with a pitchfork trying to destroy you. It's more of the concept of something that is brought to life, then being destroyed, so something else will then grow in its place. Or, similar processes that are abstract, which are then given form as beings. These are something that I see as being more of a part of reality itself, as opposed to being these fallen angels. It's like having a god stand in for a certain concept. So that is something that I would, let's say, see if we could possibly differentiate between those kind of gods standing for these abstracts and these fallen angels, or do you see them all as being one thing?
I always look at them with both lenses. You can take them as like they're real, they're literal, they're entities beyond you that have a profound impact on you, or you could take that as purely metaphorical. It's like because you believe in them, they have the same effect on you, and believing them gives you the same energy as if they were real, if that makes sense. So it's like if I believed in God versus not believing in God, it's like I think it would change my probably a lot of things I do. It's just like my entire I guess morality. I'm not even talking like in a religious sense. Like if I wasn't fearful of consequences, like I don't know what I would do. Or if I wasn't like into divine love, I don't know how I would be different. So the fact that I believe in it has a profound impact on me. So I have to wonder, like the people who believe in the shit that I hate, like what do they think? Like, so I do want to talk about the Belly of the Beast. The Belly of the Beast documentary basically asserts that there's like Osiris's obelisk is set up like in an alchemical formation, and the Crypt of Washington, like the Crypt of Washington is like adjacent from that, and they make the case like every president draws out the spirit of Osiris, like they draw up the spirit of the dead king to become, they manifest that spirit to become leader. That's what Belly of the Beast is all about, really.
What is the document that you can show? Because again, I haven't watched fully, but what is the one document that's like the smoking gun that would be able to say like, okay, what you said right now is in fact the case?
The document?
Yeah, the documents. We need the documents.
God, put me on the spot like this.
No problem.
So
yeah.
Documentation, I don't know. I mean, I should have came in with files. I don't know if any of you guys have seen like those images of like you look down DC and you have like all the alchemical
we went over that at the very beginning. So we're all on the same page when it comes to that. I think the thing that we are not on the same page about is the conclusion that's being drawn as far as like Drew. Before we were talking about what is going on here, that one way of looking at it is that it is a deification of man, and it is a ritual that would put everybody into a certain frame of mind when it comes to having more of like this humanistic rule over society, as opposed to one based on the Christian great chain of being. Would that be the correct way to say like one explanation? And would then the other explanation be a very literal resurrection of this entity, Cyrus or Apollo?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have a smoking gun. I think that the idea is so analogous to the Western way of being, like whether or not, I can't prove it, but I think it's important, like it's the backbone of it, and without it, it's like it's in trouble. So I don't have proof, I believe in it, and that's as far as I can tell you. Watch the documentary.
Well, is there like a again, back to Drew. Is there anything that we can grasp here from what Tyler was talking about, or is it so murky that anybody could just like make something up and forge a document? That at this point we really don't have anything where we could like research and get to the bottom of whether every president was kind of made to embody this avatar that Tyler was talking about of this fallen angel.
I think it's more archetypal than that. I think you could say that anybody with a vast amount of power embodies some sort of Osirian energy, because it takes sun power, the power of heavy will to come into those places. But I would just say that I know a lot of you weren't here earlier, but I had back in 2015, 2016, I was writing a book on the layout of Washington, D.C. And I had done a lot of research that I still haven't seen come out, and I hope at some point in time I'll be able to finish writing it. But what I discovered was that my family was the one who brought it out into the United States, and they started it with Alexandria, Virginia. So there's this whole mythology about how Washington, D.C. came into being, who brought it forward. But it actually was handed down through the Washington family. It was actually through the Ball family who had the designs and brought the designs through a secret society from London. And London was actually supposed to be the city that was designed like that. After the Great Fire of 1666, there was a plan to redesign London completely, and it was that exact design. I think maybe 50 years later, they ended up building it in DC, actually building it in DC, but they had begun laying it out in Washington, DC, starting with Alexandria, Virginia. And the point of interest that you all might be interested in now lies the Masonic Temple, the George Washington Masonic Memorial, which is part of King Street. And that King Street, if you continue that point, points all the way to the lighthouse in Alexandria, Egypt. So what you see with a lot of the layout in DC, et cetera, is there's essentially pointing spaces. It's there to sort of project energy as a way to use like both the architecture, but primarily directionality of human beings, traffic, et cetera, as a way to sort of project it into different places, to different energy centers. So I would say that ultimately, like I've done a lot of research into all these esoteric secret societies. I'm a Freemason. I've been studying the system for a long time. I'm not a 33rd degree Freemason, so I can't speak to like the higher levels of it. But I've studied enough of it to have some knowledge to say that I haven't come across any information in any of the information where there is a antichrist that people are trying to bring into the world. I would say that there is an energy, archetypal energy that is currently being brought into the world, and that is what's more important. So yes. that's essentially my summary of all of that.
Well, we were talking about like a president being like raised up as like a god man. There's some documentation for that sort of thing, particularly for the half of the presidents who were Freemasons. It's just not nearly as hard hitting as some would like to think. Like the third degree is, I think it's symbolically Hiram Abiff is killed by I think his brother, and then symbolically the initiate is raised up. You're shaking your head, Drew. Please go on.
No, you're getting it close. It wasn't killed by it wasn't killed by his actual brother. He was killed by three brothers who were Freemasons, so they're considered each other's brothers.
So Hiram Abiff, they say it's like supposed to be the Osirian cycle, like Osiris dies and then Horus is raised. So there is the symbology of like being raised as a divine figure, but I think it's more about, at least in these low level things, it's about like perfecting yourself. It's about like fortifying your will to be the best man you can be. So, it might get a lot more esoteric than that, but just on face value for the Freemasons, like there's definitely that ritual, but it's not as weird as people think.
So is there anything at all, Tyler, that maybe not right now, but as we keep going, you'd be able to grab on and show us, like, this is the proof right here. This is what you're all missing. This is the smoking gun. I don't know.
No, no.
Because this is why I'm so interested in having these conversations, because a lot of these things, they end up coming up, and we end up thinking, like, what exactly is going on in this strange simulation, for lack of a better word, we're in when it comes to certain ideas we may think are coming about. Are they coming about? And if so, like, the one thing that I did find, at least just like living on this planet, is that it's not exactly made like a movie, and at the same time it is like a movie, where things are done very imperfectly when it comes to, we're not made of sacred geometry, as far as there are all kinds of imperfections that are on our faces and our fingers, like there is this element of it not being perfect, which in a way makes it so much more real than it were if we were all just composed of, like these ideas, like cartoon characters and just like polygons and stuff like that. So there is something to this reality that I think makes a lot of things that come about be much more haphazardly done. So this is why I'm not really sure if, at least at this point, there would be this cataclysmic event where the skies would open up, and you know what I mean, like maybe it'll happen, but at least right now it doesn't really look like that's the kind of reality that we're currently in. But I would love for
that'd be much more satisfying, to be honest.
Well, yeah, I mean that is a good point. That is something that I would want to also touch on before we get right into the demonology aspect of it. I mean, hell, this is kind of part of the demonology aspect of it as well. This idea of what are the forms that we are coming into contact with, how, let's say, perfect are they in their appearance as far as people meeting actual demonic entities. Like when you're talking about the stereotypical idea of not even a demon as far as artistic inspiration of the daimonic genius variety, but actually, like bad hombres, like beings who would, let's say, have horns and be menacing and would just like, have sex with, the human sacrifice, just like actual things of that nature. Like, I want to get into the nitty gritty of that. What exactly is going on there? So I don't know who would want to first start speaking about it. I mean, Yakov, you are much more in the paranormal area here. So can you comment on those kind of traditional horned demon entities?
I am fairly convinced that there are people out there who are worshiping entities, and they're doing terrible things in order to gain these entities' power. I think a lot of people would just call them Satanists. Like, I'll just use that term as like a catch-all, because like, how do you define, like we said already, there's a ton of cabals. They're probably worshiping all sorts of energies, all sorts of different paths. But I do think at the very top, there are people who are trying to channel very, very negative powers that maybe they don't think are negative, but are having some terrible effects for actual people in the world. I don't think, like Freemasons, I don't think are involved with that in general. Like, there's a possibility that you get to the 33rd degree because you have to be pulled up to the 33rd degree. You don't get there by your own merits. So it's possible that maybe once you get there, you start learning some whole other secrets. I do think most of the people in the pyramid, they don't know what the hell they're doing. They like going to Bohemian Grove because they like to drink and get naked or whatever they do over there. I don't know. Nixon said it was queer as hell. I'm not sure. But the thing is, like, I think there are a few people at the top who are worshiping these entities. Most people are just dupes along the way.
Oh, exactly. I think the key point, and this is what Malachi Martin said, is that they have to be invited into you. That's the thing. There's a level of invitation there, which is quite surprising to people, because usually the way the Hollywood portrays it is some hapless dupe that stumbles upon some kind of telluric force. But I wanted to talk about, Lev, we were talking about technology and its relation to various occult entities. I think this is a good point, because when you look at the way technology rather is a discourse than just some practical hard and fast evolution of certain techniques, this goes back to like Heidegger and Mumford. Technology itself possesses in it a sort of seductive quality that lends the user to a certain pattern of behavior and a certain pattern of manipulated outcomes that leads people into a mutual sort of creation of something that I think isn't going to be very beneficial to humanity unless you're like Nick Land or someone like that. But really, I mean, it's the truth that the other day, a good friend of the show, Zero HP Lovecraft, was tweeting about how eventually all of your tweets and all of your sayings on the internet are going to come back and haunt you, and it's digital technology itself is judging you in a way. And I really think that's a startling sort of revelation about the nature of online discourse intersecting with a lot of these different forces. Because really, if you have something that is not just mutually created, but has power over you and has power over the ability to think and the various modes of thinking itself, it's almost like you could say that there's demonic and daemonic forces interplaying with digital technology. There's sort of this reality of wireheading where we're all submerged into this machine that doesn't have our best interests in mind, in my opinion. It's very interesting how we've sort of almost consented to this way of approaching, because let's face it, all of our discourse, all the things that we talk about, all the things that we argue with, it's really at the end of the day, it comes down to the modern interface of the internet. And what better way for a demonic force to slip into the consciousness of most people than through something that is generative of content that you produce yourself. You no longer are a subject, but you're an output mechanism for information that is fed into greater structures. And in a lot of ways, demonic possession is similar to that, where you become a vessel of sorts to project and generate a force within the world that is not of the true divine path, right? So
But
I don't know.
when
That's
are you
really
not a
hippie out
vessel?
there.
That's the very interesting question to me. When are we not a vessel? Because when it comes to creating, again, any art that, let's say, isn't saintly iconography, you are already at that point being a vessel to some other idea. So when exactly?
Well, we're all
what's the limit
vessels.
there?
It's just what we choose. We're all sort of vessels of different forces, right? We're vessels for. I mean, I mean, we are the imago of God. So but the problem is because of the fallenness of man, we are subject to being filled by other things, and it's when you don't have sort of a foundation in a sort of righteous path in life, a lot of people are very easy to convince in sort of a network of forces that aren't going to benefit you, that are rather, I mean, just look at the sort of mind parasites that most people believe in nowadays. I mean, even if it wasn't, I believe it is physical demons, but even if it wasn't physical demons, I mean, it might as well. It's sort of like a certain someone said about a certain controversial book about even if it wasn't real, it might as well be. So I don't know. It's
But
yeah.
when we're talking about these demons, would it be fair to say that there is always going to be a certain degree of influence of something that would not really be aiming at, coming, to God's throne, but rather being attached to something else? I mean, that goes to the idea of this life that we're in being a generation of attachment. Not just the modern condition we're in right now, but in general,
Right.
experiencing physical reality is being attached to something other than
Well, even
being...
non-attachment nowadays is sold to you as attachment. I mean, this is the essence of California Buddhism, and just robbing the third world of its trinkets and baubles to sell to people. And I hate to say this, but a lot of esotericism, unfortunately, in the West has been sort of this decontextualizing of traditions of other peoples. And so even within our circles online, I think it's very easy to sort of slip into a mindset of exoticism. In particular, certain ideologues who they sort of they want to find something older, because the problem is when you equate older with better. I mean,
Lindy.
I'm a traditionalist, but it's what the type of tradition that, and so they end up rejecting, Christianity is cucked or something like that. And so therefore, they don't realize that the econotypes of the West for the past 2,000 years has been, Christianity. And in some ways, I think that the conditions that are nowadays, and I don't know if Gravantis, you might agree with me on this, but the conditions present nowadays would make it highly, highly improbable to sort of recapitulate the same level of belief that, for example, the medieval scholastics had. But at the same time, I mean, who knows if something dramatic were to happen going into the future. The hope, at least, and again, as a Christian, you always have hope, is that one day people will sort of come to realize the salvation of Christ. But until then, I mean, we have to just deal with the forces that we're given with, and unfortunately, I mean, here's the thing: I'm not against. I think a lot. I'm friends with a lot of pagans, and
Well,
I
speaking
think,
of pagans, we got Disco
yeah, there
Orpheus
you
here.
go. Yeah, our good friend Disco. I think the good ones, they sort of don't make a big deal about it. I think the people that that are they take it as an edgy aesthetic. They're the ones who are more apt to critique the message of Christ in the modern world. And let's face it, it's true. Like, as a Catholic, I have to admit, like, the Catholic Church did fail in a lot of ways. But yeah, I'll say no more. But I don't know. Maybe Gravantis, you want to take over there?
And also really
I
quickly,
think despair is a sin. That's the problem. And
Mm.
as someone who deals with despair on a daily basis, I think.
Well,
Yeah.
it also comes down to, I mean, my whole thing has always been, it comes down to do unto others as you would have be done unto you. That is, I think, if that's not in there, then it's not Christianity anymore. Like, regardless of whatever other rites are in Christianity, someone who subscribes to that, I think that they are already on the right track. But Gravantis, let me know what you think.
Yeah, just to kind of jump off something Gio had mentioned, this idea of, we're kind of always interacting with this idea of getting like filled with something, at least from like the Orthodox perspective. Saint Seraphimus Rav, he has a book on acquisition of the Holy Spirit, kind of like that's the purpose of life. And on the converse, it reminded me of a different story. John the Apostle, like later in life, after he was banished to Patmos, after the Romans failed to boil him alive, the priests of Apollo like kind of went to this magician, and they wanted to kind of get rid of John. So this magician named Kynops, he sent a demon after him, and so John binds the demon, and he's kind of like quizzing him, and at one point the demon says something along the lines of like, all the power of Satan is in him. He has covenant with our princes, we with him. Kynops obeys us and we obey him. And I think that is kind of the idea of how we should see kind of like the interplay with like spiritual entities. It's less kind of like a subservience and more like this working together. And I think that is, in a sense, how we should, I guess, like understand what's happening. There's definitely a interplay between, it's not like someone, bowing down or whatever. It's this push and pull interplay between the two. And I think that's something that we need to be careful of. And especially when Gio was mentioning like this kind of decline of Christianity, in America, at least, from the beginning, America is a deeply religious country, a nation of people. And I don't mean that in like a Christian sense. We have John Winthrop, City on a Hill. I think it'd be hard to say that America in its current state today is Christian, but that idea of City of the Hill has kind of like persisted throughout. Kennedy had mentioned it, Ronald Reagan had mentioned it. I think I saw James Comey mention it. But this idea of Americans as this evangelistic people, whether it's a Christian faith or sort of like this imperialistic ideology, it's just, this energy and how it's redirected into sort of what force. And I think we very much are seeing this religious revival, not in kind of like classical religions, but we see this in like the BLM movement. We see this in QAnon. And I think those are kind of like these two
exactly, yeah,
modern day cults in a sense.
Well, this is what I want to get to, something that Drew messaged me about, that there is a connection to Black Lives Matter and certain demonic influences in terms of its origin. So, Drew, take it away.
Yeah, so this is no secret. They're very open about it. Like a lot of things that the women who were a part of the Black Lives Matter movement are open about, but people don't discuss the fact that they're quote unquote trained Marxists, all this stuff. We like to look at their socio-political movement, but most people are not aware that the Black Lives Matter, and I would actually distinguish that the Black Lives Matter movement is very different than the QAnon movement, because while one is sort of like an online grassroots, you can call it a cult or whatever, the other one is an actual spiritual movement that is essentially breaking ground into what I feel is a new type of religion that's a combination of many different ideations. So there is a African religion, they don't really call it a religion, but a spiritual practice called Ifa. And Ifa has given birth, it's like supposed to be thousands of years old. You can see it manifested in a lot of different religions that go to Haiti, etc. You know, voodoo, all of this stuff essentially has roots in Ifa. And the principles of Ifa are not homogenous, but they differ a lot, but depending on where you go, but they have some core to it. One of them is veneration of the ancestral line. But the other core of it is that you are communing with the dead. You're also communing with entities that exist in the world. And in this, there's no such thing as Satan. They don't see a Satan. There's no supreme evil, but there's a balance between positive and negative beings. So the three women who are a part of the Black Lives Matter are, and I'm going to quote them just so there's no misunderstanding here. I'm not quoting them directly, but I'm paraphrasing. The Black Lives Matter is a spiritual movement. It is based on Ifa, that they purposefully stand on the hallowed ground of spilled blood. And while they are doing their demonstrations, they are effectively creating a ritual where they are pouring libations over the spirit of, over the blood of the slain person in order to resurrect them, in order to bring their soul to life on this earth. Again, or to manifest, and ultimately their desire is to manifest the ancient African gods here on in the US.
Are you telling me that pouring one out for your dead homies is like a tribal thing?
I don't know if that's necessarily related, but these people are specifically doing the conjuring or practicing the Ifa religion. So this gets into the whole thing about say their name and the importance of why the Black Lives Matter movement is so focused on getting people to say their name. Now this is like the repetition. Yeah, it's a repetition of the dead soul that essentially wakes up a certain type of energy, and it's not necessarily that soul that they're trying to bring in, but it's sort of like the energy of the undead bringing them up into the surface. So this gets really into what's interesting about them. The Black Lives Matter movement is what they're doing is they're unwittingly bringing millions of people into that ritual with them. And to me, because this is where I'll distinguish it from the traditional Ifa, which is a personal practice. You do it, you set up your own altar. I would never have a problem with this because it's a personal preference. Whatever people want to do with themselves, they can worship which God they'd like. But with Black Lives Matter, they are bringing other people into this ritual in a non-consensual way. And what that is doing is creating a culture where millions of people are venerating the undead in a way that the Black Lives Matter movement are doing three things. One is that they're integrating IFA. The second is they're doing a performance art that's very similar to Marina Abramovic. And I know Marina is seen as a performance artist, but she's actually practicing what you call magic. She's less performance art, more mystical. And I think people don't really understand that so much. There's a power in bringing these sacred traditions to the public and unveiling it in a way that people don't know. And this is what's been practiced over the centuries, and especially when we're talking about Washington, D.C. and all of these things, you're forcing people to participate in these rituals or engage in symbols unwittingly. And that to me sort of underlines the fact that they're creating a culture. The last aspect of Black Lives Matter that they're doing is they're sort of integrating Afrocentrism in a way where it's very similar to what the Nazis were doing during their time. And I think this is I have a lot of friends who are sort of intuitives and whatever, mystical. For some reason, they could never get on board with Black Lives Matter. They couldn't really understand what it was. There was sort of this dark cloud hanging over them, so to speak. And I think now we're sort of seeing that these people are forcefully indoctrinating people around this cult. And what I think is what they're trying to start is a new religion, but that's a religion of the state. And like I said, the Nazis did the exact same thing where they were forcefully indoctrinating people. They were integrating symbols from places that the whole idea of the Aryan, they co-opted it. Aryan meant Persian. The whole idea of a swastika was a Hindu thing. I mean, this is sort of co-optation of other cultures. So I think we're going to see more and more of this push into this. But for me, it's completely unethical, even from people who are practice abstract religions or anything, even thing in the border. There's a difference between having a personal preference and forcing other people to participate into it. And I think this is the danger that we're seeing now. Why are people behaving erratically? Why are people acting, burning buildings, hurting other people, endangering themselves, endangering and murdering other people too? And my answer to that is because at the root of this is the summoning of spirits, that people are filled with a spirit that doesn't belong to them.
Well, Drew, can I comment on that? I think what you said was very brilliant, and it really hits at the heart of what we're experiencing. And we just saw on the chat the hologram of George Floyd that's making the world tour now. So there you go. I think that, and to me, I think this is fascinating because it intersects with so much different stuff. My experience, for example, in the contemporary art world, I mean, BLM is like basically the in vogue du jour flavor of a lot of very, hackish type artists that literally just writing BLM on a canvas, like this is the level of discourse. But I think that you strike the heart of it because to me it seems that, and this isn't a bad thing. I'm not, I'm very interested in a lot of post-colonial stuff. When you invoke, for example, the notion of intergenerational trauma, and this is what the sort of the materialistic post-new atheist anti-SJW like Twilight crowd, that they don't get this. They don't understand that they're invoking a metaphysical claim when you talk about things like intergenerational trauma. Because if you look at, for example, there was this leader of Black Lives Matter she was, again, another Dolezal type. She was pretending to be black, but she was a Jewish woman. Sorry, I shouldn't have said Jewish, but yeah, well, that can get into a lot of heat. She wrote this book. It's called Fugitive Modernities, and I think it's a good book that everyone should read because in it she talks about the different sort of practices of struggle in a lot of different post-colonial movements, and specifically a lot of them from, Haiti is the biggest example. Of course, in Brazil, there were different mystical practices and different martial arts that were developed from Africanized and mystical, very almost similar to yoga.
Yeah, capoeira.
Yeah, the capoeira, yeah. They were developed specifically to resist colonialization, to resist the colonial other, and to sort of empower almost like a ghost dance. Like the ghost dances were similar, but that, of course, is the North American indigenous people. But throughout all of these different practices, you see this almost weird postmodern, politicized recourse to more ancient pagan forms of ritualism and belief that are very specific to certain peoples. But now, the reason I say they're postmodern is because they're decontextualized and brought to America to African Americans who don't have ancestral connections, or rather, their ancestral connections were severed to a lot of these practices. And you also notice this goes with what I'm noticing, this increasing hostility and towards Christianity, because Christianity is seen as the religion of the colonizer. And you have the very like stupid, discourse on Twitter of like, these same people that brought us Christianity are the people that put us on the boat and stuff like that. And so to me, this goes into the aesthetics of it, of the iconography of Black Lives Matter, of putting the icons of Saint Trayvon, Saint Floyd, all of these people on the walls of various cities while they're burning in the background. It's a lot of occultic forces, and to me, I don't think that this is. I mean, of course, I think it's a bad thing because, like you're saying, they're misleading people, and they're taking sort of mythologies that don't belong to them, and they're forcing people into this mindset. I mean, even the people that are their quote unquote allies. There's a stunning video of this procession of people carrying the Black Fist of Liberation. I don't know if you saw that, Drew, on Twitter, but there was this video where it's like this 12-foot tall Black Power fist that people are carrying, very symbolic of ancient pagan rituals. And to me, I think this releasing of energy, this is what we're seeing, but it's coming out in a hyper-politicized, secular Gnostic form in a lot of ways. A lot of secular Gnosticism is going on right now, this sort of pull towards liberation through woke politics. And this is something that, unfortunately, a lot of conservative discourse is terribly lacking, because they think that these people are just Marxists, and a lot of them are just Marxists. But I think if you actually read what they're saying, like Drew, the research that you're doing, this stuff is very fascinating, and it also intersects with the art world, because the art world right now is like really going nuts over this neo-pagan symbolism. I mean, you could go and we'll save it, but I wrote this long form about this gallery that has a lot of similar themes of the terrible mother archetype. It was called Abortion is Normal, but they also had to shoehorn in the race politics. If you look up the gallery Abortion is Normal, I did this long critique of it, but essentially you have the same theme of the terrible mother coming and consuming the child, the fertility goddess that gives life but also takes life away to her children. And I think these forces, I don't know, the primal chaos is being unleashed, and not in the stupid psychologized Jordan Peterson way. I mean, actual discordance is coming. And sorry, I'll cut myself off right now. But yeah,
I think there's this might be a bit of a stretch, but I think there's like you say, with the sort of neo-pagan revival with Black Lives Matter. There's some sort of phallic imagery associated with it as well, perhaps subterraneanly. I don't know, like the Black Fist, to me, especially when I saw that giant 12-foot Black Fist being paraded through the streets, it
total phallic worship.
Yeah, it's phallic imagery, and that again is of course sort of like.
I'm trying to find a picture of it right now. For some reason, it's not being brought up. If anybody has that picture, go into our Discord, btr-chat.
Big occult energy.
Yes.
yeah, huge, yeah.
But also, Disco Orpheus, since you are, I believe, more in the paganistic side, do you see there being a connection there, as well as there being a differentiator, where certain aspects of paganism you would go for, but other ones there would be enough of a morality at play to reject, and to know what you would put in the category of being good or closer to the idea of do unto others as you would be done unto yourself? and those that are much more destructive. So I'm curious if you can comment on that.
Yes, I mean, I suppose to my own paganism, pagan is, well, it essentially means a man of the land, or someone of the land. And so paganism is attached to ethnicity and heritage a lot. So it's difficult for me to extrapolate between my own like pagan associations, which I tie into the blood that runs through my veins, compared to the moralistic argument of what you were saying. Let me think about that.
It's a very interesting concept to me. I mean, it kind of touches on what we were talking before about art, where whenever any human being produces anything of art that is not necessarily connected to their particular religion, to a Christian religion, then it would automatically be something that would be pagan, I think. You know what I mean? Like, it's something that would have you as a creator making something that, unless it's biblically themed, it's something else. It's something that is not necessarily connected to God or Jesus or the apostles or the saints. So when it comes to that kind of imagery and that kind of creation, I would put that in the category of being inspired by these things that, you could call muses, you could call it whatever, but they would be outside of the framework that Christianity would label like, this is the stuff that you have to do that is good. But there I wonder, where does the neutral territory end and the much more, let's say, malevolent, demonic aspects begin when it comes to creating something that is outside of Christian framework?
Yeah, certainly. I think belief is a technology, and so in a way, like the sort of coagulation of beliefs, and when they take mildly anthropomorphic ideations, I suppose, they harness the belief of the people that thrust into it, and so it just becomes, this is the idea of the egregore, I suppose, and that can be beneficial or a negative. My view of Black Lives Matter is I wonder how they might think they're creating this sort of like neo-African pagan god, or trying to revive it. But it seems most likely that they're just play acting for the state, essentially.
Well, it could also be both. Like, I wonder, when it comes to the French Revolution, what was going on back then. There was a lot of murder, a lot of bloodshed, but were there similar things going on with Drew?
I've got a lot to say here. Both because I've done a lot of research and I've lived on the fringes of political movements. And one is first that I saw Black Lives Matter co-opted. So the story that you hear in the media on Wikipedia is not the story of Black Lives Matter. Those three women are not are not the founders of Black Lives Matter. It was founded by two men, two Black men. I can't remember their name right now, but they were essentially forced out by powers that be. So it is because, and we talked about this earlier, I was one of the founding members of the Tea Party, which was essentially co-opted by other forces that be, that will go unnamed because they were unseen. But that ultimately turned into a Republican rhino party with, everybody who was a standard Republican going. So and I think what you see often is grassroots, any successful grassroots movement is essentially co-opted by powerful people. Now you see that Black Lives Matter has raised hundreds of millions of dollars. Maybe there's people who put that number at $1 billion. Nobody knows where that money has gone. So you know that there's a lot of power behind it, and probably much more power than those three women would be able to handle. If you can imagine those three women handling more than $1 billion or hundreds of millions of dollars, that's unlikely. So what I believe had happened was that the Black Lives Matter movement was quickly co-opted, and these women became the face of it, and that the construction of it was purposefully built like this. And I think getting back to the root of what you were saying earlier, Lev, the difference between beneficial and non-beneficial uses of spirituality is based on whether somebody has free will in the transaction. And what I am saying, and what my research that is showing, is that in the case of Black Lives Matter, the participants, for the most part, are completely blind to the ritual that they're taking part in. This, to me, says that there is something sinister going on, that they are being used and utilized in order to build a socio-political movement that is not in their benefit. Otherwise, they would say, Yami would come out, or I'm sorry, what's her name? Patrice would come out and say, look, hey guys, Black Lives Matter is a spiritual movement. We're doing this ritual here. That is exactly what Black Lives Matter is. It is a spiritual movement. And she would say this to everybody every time that she talked, taking people step by step in the significance of the ritual, why they're participating into it. That's not the case. So instead, what I think is the opposite of benevolent is happening, and people are being used in order to build a new empire, so to speak. And I think that's what you're seeing now, is the beginning of that. This is exactly.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like the rituals on the surface appear one thing, but they all have subterranean implications. Like taking the knee, for instance, has huge subterranean implications. Obviously, the idea of submission, blah, 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 that's kind of basic. But Lev, you said someone here is a Freemason?
Well, Drew.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Is the taking the knee, is that a Freemason ritual? Or it maybe not.
It's not
ritual, but
it's not related.
It's not used within.
I mean, they're taking the knee is used in Freemasonry, but I don't see the correlation. I don't see an energetic or a philosophical correlation between the two, because one of them is about, I would say in Freemasonry, it's about lowering your ego, and this one is about subjugation of masses. So it's the difference is an individual taking a knee versus thousands of people taking the knee because somebody told them to do it. And the one of them is of your own free will, basically. Like you do this because this is your choice. The other one that I'm seeing is that you don't have, this is not an option for you, right?
I do find this is slightly left field, but the Game of Thrones comparison is very tantalizing. Like, what was the most profound TV show for the average normie in the last 2 decades is Game of Thrones. And, bend the knee, take the knee. And it's it's very ironic. And then you can see another example of that with Winter is Coming. So I don't know about in America, but in England, we've had a lot of winter is coming with the second lockdown, the potential of a second lockdown with COVID and this sort of stuff. And it's just the parallels are just too ironic to take seriously, really. I don't know how you feel about that, but it is interesting.
If I can respond also, I think Buff in the comments section, are you aware which ritual you're serving when you're watching TV or voting? And I think that's a response to what I was saying, but I would respond to that that's exactly my point. This is another ritual designed to create an establishment that people are unaware of how they're engaging with.
Yeah, it's to direct belief, I would say.
Or
therefore, it becomes like you harness it and it becomes this powerful entity in and of itself.
So ultimately, does it come down to, let's say, the ANCAP non-aggression principle when it comes to defining whether certain things, which may not necessarily be Christian, but would be of the kind of variety of sure, we're going to participate in worshiping certain entities, but as long as we don't force other people to do something that they are not aware of, then it's all good in the hood? Or is there still potential for misuse even within those parameters when it comes to dabbling in the occult? I'm not sure who wants to. I know I asked these questions and nobody really knows who should respond. So how about Graventus?
Repeat it one more time.
Sure. Okay. What I'm basically getting here is when it comes to living as a pagan, like taking away, faith that Christianity is the one, taking that out of the equation for a second, and just dealing with, let's say, I know without faith you would still have the morality of do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. So when it comes to pagan rituals that prescribe to that notion, do you see a big difference between them and things of a much hairier nature, things of a much more destructive nature when it comes to breaking this non-aggression principle?
I wouldn't. I kind of disagree with the premise. I don't know if that's a universal kind of belief thought process. It's something that Nietzsche had said as a criticism of Christianity, but I agree with, where he said that sort of the individual has been deified to such a degree, being in the image of God, that he can no longer be sacrificed for society as a whole. And I agree with it. He thought it was a negative. I don't. But I mean, we see, and of course, each pagan tradition or whatever, there's variations and whatnot. So not to paint with like a broad brush, but where we see that, a lot of the time there is this kind of might makes right sense. So I don't know if this idea that, the golden rule is necessarily universally applicable and everyone would have that morality.
Well, let's take, for example, Hinduism, and not to paint that with a broad brush either, because of course there are different sects, but if they get to such an extent of morality when it comes to not hurting life, that they wouldn't hurt, these cows that here in the United States we slaughter in these factory farms, which are horrible situations for any living being, there seems to be, at a certain level, not that all the Indians are following this to their fellow man, but the idea there does seem to be that life is sacred and that there should be a respect for living things. And again, not everybody would prescribe to that who's living in India, but still, if that is somewhat of a seed of morality that's been planted there, not just for the human beings, but even for other sentient life forms, like as far as the degree of sentience of a cow, like I do look at a cow and I also see something very, it is in a way a person that's been morphed into a cow.
Yeah, especially, you know how, have you ever heard Swedish cow calling?
No.
So women learned to sing these particular songs, and they would basically attract cows from, several fields away. And eventually there would be 100 cows in front of this woman, and they're all there sort of fascinated by this woman singing. There is some sentience, of course, but especially in cows. So it's like at least I can understand why Hindus revere them so.
Now,
milky energy.
I do generally agree with Drew's premise. Though when we're talking about consent with, I don't know, religious or spiritual or metaphysical aspects, however you want to say this, I think all religions have their exoteric and esoteric. So I think it's a thin line about because people who like Christians, your average Christian has no idea why they believe what they believe or anything. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but with Black Lives Matter, I definitely agree, because I've been seeing a lot of baby boomers in particular lately who are just repeating the mantra of Black Lives Matter. And to them, it's just that. It's just the sentence. And it's like, why is that so hard to say? But they don't realize how loaded it is, how much money is behind it, the kind of people that are behind it. They're not seeing, I don't know what the hell they're seeing on the news, frankly, because it must not be what I'm seeing. But yeah, they think it's as easy as words. And even if it were words, they're still willing something into existence. But when it's got this much money behind it, it's just horrifying.
Watching the news was the first mistake, actually, for all boomers.
Yeah, if you watch the news, you are the least well-informed person to the world around you.
It's like this meme I saw on Twitter. This was like a month ago about that exact thing about people that Oh wait, I tweeted about that. People that vociferously watch the news and think that it's like I'm a political junkie, but ironically enough, it's worse than like watching the 24-hour news cycle. It's worse than being informed. It's actively destroying knowledge. It's like it's not even about not knowing. It's destroying knowledge itself. So
Yeah, so I don't really know like what exact thing we can agree on as far as the balance of living a more pagan, like Disco Orpheus was talking about, rooted to ancestral customs type of life, while at the same time making room for this morality that does come into play with Christianity. And again, to the extent that I've seen respect and reverence for living beings expressed by certain Hindu swamis and gurus, I wouldn't take away their morality, as what they present, just because they don't subscribe to the particular processes that have gone on in, in Israel, in these regions that then expanded to Europe, and here we are today. But that is like, and I understand that that is going against faith of this one particular structure that is the right one. But like I told Gio in a conversation we had a couple of months ago, if the conclusions are such that you end up helping people out and you end up loving people and there is a light that shines from you in the actions that you do unto others, then regardless of what is around it, because look, even with Catholicism, you can look at the Catholicism today or even back, I don't know how many centuries you'd have to go, like when St. Peter's was built. St. Peter's, as Tyler was in that documentary, it was also built in a way as a sigil. So there are elements that are being played within Christianity, within the frameworks around Christianity, that also hearken to other things. So it's like when we take those elements away, and when we take away any of the rituals, whether it's Orthodox or Catholic, then what are we left with? If we are left with something that would be pretty obvious what is good as far as the way that you would treat people, then I guess I would implore anybody who's listening, like whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, like I think those things can be taken as being good things, and we do have the ability to differentiate between good and evil when it comes to that. But I'm curious about what everybody else thinks. Like Tyler, I know you're a Christian, so
well, not really. I'm not, but I think it's important, if that makes sense. I don't know how else to describe that. Like, all I believe in is God, but I believe it's important for others. I guess this will probably sound awful, but like when I deal with stupid people, it's like I find that stupid people that have that backbone tend to at least be a little more well-behaved. Like I've lived in a bunch of different places and I've just seen like anyone without like a sense of morality, whether or not they understand it, if it was instilled in them, I find they tend to be better. They tend to be like more conscious and loving of others. That's what I found. But it's like everyone here is obviously like pretty self-actualized and pretty like conscious. That's a fact. Like we are that way, but like it's like the Black Lives Matter thing.
I feel so warm now.
And I've done my job.
The dimwit who believes in God but doesn't know why he believes in God is often more of a magnanimous and graceful person than the midwit who knows that he's an atheist.
Midwood Highwood Alliance, right there. That's true.
Yeah, and now that I'm done jerking us all off, I mean, you can see it's like the Black Lives Matter stuff. Half of them don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They're just along for the ride, and it's like,
or they want a pair of Jordans. I mean, that's
yeah. Who doesn't?
I think without tradition to root people, you end up with just like a sea of deracinated folk who.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Far more likely to be to not have the wherewithal to like defend morality, if it were, and so are more easily co-opted and subverted.
Yeah, exactly. I just realized we cut off Tyler. I'm very sorry.
Oh, that's okay. My point was like, these conversations are good, and there's like, I mean, you guys are smart, you probably have smart friends, but like I hardly know anyone. Like the grand scheme of people I know, it's low. Like conversations like these are good, but at the end of the day, it's like do you guys do anything pragmatically to like put your views in play? Like I wonder how much this gets viewed. Like, how much of an impact do you think this kind of stuff has?
Well, we have 39 people watching right now, which ain't bad, but we gotta grow, and we will grow.
It's more than before.
It is more than before, definitely. And we are gonna grow with your help. So again, guys, you gotta reach out to friends of yours and get them to watch this stream, get them to subscribe, and subscribe if you have not subscribed yet. We gotta get more subscribers in here, and also you can donate to us. You can support us by going to streamlabs.com/SlevJules, which you see on the lower right-hand side there, and also if you have any crypto, you could help us out like that as well by donating some crypto. So I'm gonna link it in the chat right here for anybody who wants to do that, and whatever message you write, if you have a question, if you have something that you want us to devote like 5 minutes to discussing, then if you donate right now and write that in, we will discuss it, pinky swear. So just FYI for all the people who are watching out there. But Drew, where do you stand when it comes to the idea of morality in a sense that it may go beyond the Christian ethos, while at the same time, like Tyler and like Disco and like Gio were talking about, you do get these people who are not like the most cultured people, who nevertheless display like this earnestness of wanting to be somebody, wanting to be good, wanting to be a good Christian, and it reflects on the rest of society, and everybody gets better as a result of it.
Well, I think this is the issue at hand, which is desire in itself. And I think this is where we get into the whole root of demonology to begin with. Because when we want so much that we start asking outside forces to deliver for us things that we don't think that we can give ourselves, then we put ourselves in the perilous place where we become essentially in a place where we can be undermined by any one of those forces, where the ownership of ourselves and our experience becomes less about our own doing. And there's a really interesting book that I read years ago, a woman named Eliza Marion Butler, and it's called Ritual Magic. And in it, she proposes that the birth of modern demonology, and she died in 1952, so I think this was written in the 1930s, was rooted in, basically the way we look at it now is all rooted predominantly through the legend of Faust. And that's how, for the most part, through the West, we look at the effects of demonology. And what she says is, in her supposition, is that the legend of Faust all originates with the Templars. During the Crusades, the Templars go into Jerusalem and excavate the Temple of King Solomon. And out of having done that, there is a mythology that they had discovered a book or a series of books or other artifacts. I mean, there's a lot of mythologies, the whatever, this Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of thing. But her particular thing is that there's these books that come out from buried underneath their temple. And this is not necessarily something that she says happened, but the legend is that these books, now called the Little Key of Solomon and the Key of Solomon, gave root to the rise of modern day demonology, or even demonology during the Middle Ages and post Middle Ages. And in that, basically the story is King Solomon had built his temple, and had expelled all of the magicians, all of the witches under the name and the auspices of the kingdom of God, except for one that lived high up on a hill. And he couldn't get to her because she had some magical force field or something around her. Anyway, that after a while, his kingdom starts to falter. and he can't do anything about it. And he tries one thing or another, and inevitably what he does is he goes up by himself to see this witch, and he asks her to help him reestablish his kingdom. And in that, she gives to him this talisman, which is the key, the seal of Solomon, which is a 6-pointed star, which now is turned into over time the 5-pointed star, but in this mythology is the 6-pointed star, which turned into the Star of David. But by the way, the Star of David didn't exist before this story came out, not in a way that we know it in popular culture. So essentially, what she does is she talks to King Solomon, says, "Look, this is how you gain power. You essentially you summon a demon, and then you conjure an angel, and the angel binds the demon. You can interrogate that demon, find out who the demon above him is and the angel above him is, and do this as a stepping stone, a ladder, until you get higher and higher powers, until ultimately you're dealing with Archangel Michael and Beelzebub." And with that, and there's a mythology around this, that this is how King Solomon's temple was constructed in this mythology, that Archangel Michael and Beelzebub were bound, creating this power that essentially could hew stone in half without any noise, essentially without the use of any tools. So the story is that the entire temple was built with this demonic power. But ultimately, Beelzebub overtakes Solomon and completely destroys him, basically owns him, and he dies a miserable death. That's definitely not the Christian canon, but that's what comes out of this mythology. That is then brought into Germany and Norway at the time, and begins this series of stories that are essentially written called the grimoires. And all of the grimoires led to essentially the legend of Faust, where we have now this sort of like this larger story, a more popular story of a guy who's overtaken. But it's essentially a replicate of what this of this story. So I think in that is like a really interesting, there's a lot of different observations in that I think a lot of what we think of in demonology is not necessarily rooted in far history. A lot of the uses of symbols, etc., not necessarily has anything to do with demonology in a traditional sense, but was born out of the Middle Ages and a desire to understand mythology in a way that may have been misplaced. And this is where also you have the Book of Enoch and all of these other stories sort of arising around the same time, integrating into society. So I think that the whole concept of demonology is the way that it's currently seen or practiced, maybe by some, is only originates back into the 1400s. But before that was not necessarily practiced the same way that we did prior to that. But I think that there's an even deeper root. Maybe I'm going to leave that there because I want to go further back in history, but I don't want to spend too much time talking without letting others get in.
Well, this is really fascinating. I just wanted to say one thing real quick. As you could see the images that I was posting here, I see a resemblance between these various keys and rings that were made, and let's say the Sri Yantra, as well as this spiritual eye, which again is something that I did not design this thing. I found it on the internet, but as you could see, it's very close to the image I posted before of what I see during meditation. So the idea there is that the 5-pointed star is something that I did see a couple of times too. So the 5-pointed star, you have it over here in this symbol as well. And the idea here is that this is something that wasn't just made haphazardly, but it does connect to a deeper framework that's going on when people get into these altered states of consciousness. But anyway, that was just my 2 cents on it. So does anybody, before Drew goes on into the deeper lore here, does anybody else want to say anything or make a comment?
I've always gotten the sense that Kabbalah was like rooted in Eastern mysticism. I feel like somewhere along the way, like they got that thread of thought and they kind of brought it over. So are we saying that's like a perennial thing, or does anybody know about that? Because I would like to know. I always felt like the tree of life and the chakra system are like way too similar. And it's not like Europe didn't have access to Eastern mysticism by that point. Like the West understood like that sort of thing since the time of like Alexander the Great.
Yeah, there's a degree of omnism, you know, that sort of like the truth that lies esoterically beneath all religions. You know, if you look at
Yggdrasil.
Yeah, exactly. I was just about to say that precisely. Yeah.
And I touched on the Mesopotamian tree of life before, where you have the birdmen with the cones standing next to this very nice looking tree, and on the very top of the tree you have the winged sun, or the Farvahar, or whatever you want to call it, which again is like same thing with the Caduceus. It's all talking about a process that human beings are capable of going through, where this primal energy goes up your spine, goes, you know, through like either into your third eye or through, I don't know, but that's when you're supposed to have the experience of this feeling of oneness. And I don't know, it's interesting to me to look at the way the human body is shaped, designed, however you want to say it, and all these metaphysical maps of consciousness and the universe of higher levels of being.
Yeah. I mean, even like I've heard people say the human body is like a Tesla coil. So the sacrum and then the spine and then the skull at the top sort of acts in this conducting manner in the same way that the Tesla coil does. And then you can go back and look at the Egyptian pyramids and postulate that is the same technology.
Interesting. Well, here's an image of it. The human being as a Tesla coil. And right there, like how many times, you know, how many different traditions are over here? We have the Kabbalah, we have the chakras, we have the Caduceus that was used in ancient Greece, and we have Nikola Tesla, who got all sorts of interesting visions. And the other thing, by the way, about Tesla is that in his biography, which was written by a friend of his friend talks about how when Nikola Tesla breathed in and out slowly, he would feel a sensation in his spine. So that is another interesting thing that I had no idea about before I read it, having to do with how a lot of these processes work. I'm just not sure if enough people who have contributed these very visionary things to society have really gathered around to discuss it. And one other thing I would love to touch on with Drew or anybody else who wants to comment before Drew dives even deeper into the lore here is when it comes to, from your experience, Drew, or from things that you have heard, when it comes to people who are, let's say, the attendees of Bohemian Grove or any other secretive organization, how many of them have gone the path of meditation and Kundalini and the experience of a lot of these different things, as opposed to just blindly following whatever orders they're given as far as what the truth is? Everybody subscribe right now. I think Drew is... yeah.
Alex Jones says that the CIA is taking DMT. They're like injecting DMT to go consult with the spirits. He says he has the documents.
Yeah,
I don't believe him.
I think the CIA, and I've heard this, that before MK Ultra and the other projects that they ran, like the mind control projects, they started off by taking LSD themselves, like back in the 50s, and they were just sitting around in the office or whatever, as spooks do, I guess. And then they're like, as you do while you're on LSD, come up with a myriad of plans, and they decide, well, why aren't we just doing this to the general public? And then
just like accidentally create like a child sex trafficking cult. Oops, sorry.
Something like that, definitely.
Well, you see, apparently the CIA and the OSS, they created all modern art, apparently, is created by the intelligence agencies. That's what I heard. There's no such thing.
There is an interesting New York Times article in the 90s that actually explained how, Pollock basically, or I don't know if it was Pollock, but they essentially said that they financed particular artists to create formless art. basically. So
Yeah.
art that the layman couldn't understand.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's the sort of intersection of these the projects of these intelligence agencies, what they're doing uh, in terms of creating a sort of environment of formlessness, because the new sort of almost predating the digitalized humanity that we find ourselves in. The argument, of course, is the chicken and the egg, because what came first, the response to the genealogies of modern art movements themselves, or the glow in the darks funding them. And I think that's, again, this is sort of like, I think this is where I disagree with a lot of people in our spheres, because there is a level where you have to realize that maybe not everything is perfectly neatly packaged into a conspiracy, but rather these are discourses that have come about, certainly in the art world, the sort of responses that artists were uh, creating to certain conditions of the modern world. This is where I sort of like disagree with the take, well, because the CIA gave them money, blah blah.
Yeah.
The
No,
whole story. But
I
yeah.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like two elements, the
There's certain people out there that think there's no such thing as art history, that it's all just a psyops.
yeah.
I don't know if
I
I'm
can-
casting
to
shade
be
on
honest,
anyone in particular, but it's just yeah.
I
It came up.
empathize with that, because at one point I teetered on that.
No, it's true. I mean, a lot of it. I mean, there is certain glowing activities attached. Well, to me, I think the more effective means of spreading this would be popular culture and the culture industry, because it seems that the art world has succumbed to its own several different neuroses. Whereas nowadays, I think the real impact would be within things that most common, ordinary, quote unquote normies consume. So I think that's probably a better bet than funding the art galleries in New York.
So I've got to get off of here. Can I shill real quick?
Go for it. Go for the shilling.
Skinwalker Tapes. You can find me on YouTube, Skinwalker Tapes Archive. Tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're going to be on bitwave.tv/Yakov Live. And I'm going to have Roscoe from Exodus Americanus, and it's going to be amazing. We're going to watch cryptid videos. I want to thank you, Lev, for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank
And
you.
also you had
I love you guys.
I love you too. And also you had Hotep Sophia on a recent episode of yours, and today is Hotep Sophia's birthday. So I want to wish Hotep Sophia, if you're watching this, happy birthday. I hope you're enjoying this program.
It was one of our most popular episodes, so definitely check it out. I'm going to post in the chat. You can see my channel. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. So subscribe to Skinwalker Tapes right after you subscribe to Break the Rules. You better subscribe. I'm telling you, this is going to be worth it. And you better give us some money, because we need to grow. And if you become a patron, limited time deal, $20 patronage has you... What am I even saying? $20 patrons get a print from Geo, and Geo is amazing. I love your prints. I'm going to post one right now. I'm going to post your Instagram. So I do want to get back to... I mean, I know it's kind of an open...
Please donate money, or even a manual typewriter.
Oh, I love that guy.
Sorry, I'm doing a Francis Deck bit. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm gonna send that video to everybody too. But I still, even though it is kind of an open-ended question, I realize like how many people do A, B, and C. But in general, the vibe that you would get, Drew, from the societies that you have partaken in, how many of them want to or are interested in exploring the physical? I mean, the all these extra elements that can be done through breathing, through meditation, when it comes to Kundalini and stuff like that. And do they also draw the same conclusions to this primordialness being something within the human body that can then be observed as symbols all around us? I can't hear you. You're muted.
I did the opposite. Okay.
There.
I mean, I would just put it this way. One is I can only speak for myself, but from what I observed, I can only observe from the small mystical communities I'm a part of, which, they don't get more than 20 people per meeting. I think when we're discussing about the larger groups, mystical groups that are attached to people with power. I can only surmise that many of them are not at all interested in doing those kinds of things at all. Because I think there's two things. I think there's two things that people get out of being a part of a mystical order. One is seeing a higher version of yourself, and the other one is to consolidate power and the chase of power. And I think that very usually the two are not interlinked. And I would also say that people who have done enough spiritual work, whether it's breathing or meditation or whatever, they generally tend to disavow their power. They tend to want to go inward versus outward. So I think you have two different types of actions that are married to the same type of thing, which is going into a secret order. One is to, I think, reveal yourself. The other one is to build yourself. Does that make sense?
I think it definitely makes sense. I would say, though, that if you are someone who wants to do something to get to a higher level within, while at the same time you wouldn't mind, living, in a better location, let's say, with better gardening, just like doing certain things to at least make your stay here not as, filled up with noise and misery, or even if you just want to explore for the hell of it, I could imagine having a siddhi where you can, I don't know, I understand the whole thing about no, you can't get too attached, but if you do have a siddhi where you can do cool stuff like zoom in on something and see all the cells and stuff like that, or even going into the astral realm whenever you want to, again, attachment, I understand it, but still, I could see, okay, how about this perspective? When it comes to the people who want power, wouldn't they want to try to get the siddhis? Wouldn't that just be the speed running mode of why do I have to listen to this guy with a funny hat? Why can't I just get some siddhis and then I'll be the master of all masons? I'll be, you know what I mean?
Well, it's about.
Wait, what are siddhis?
Siddhis is another word for superpowers.
Okay. Oh, is that? No, never mind. Yeah.
Yeah, but those are just after effects. They aren't the real. Well, at least I know in Vedanta it's not the real goal. But
sure, well, that's what I said already. So my whole point here is that, for the people who may be ignorant of that, and they encounter these siddhis, and they would want to use them to gain power over this world, what is exactly stopping that from happening? Is it the accompaniment of having this sense of, wait a minute, there's something more going on here, maybe I shouldn't? That's kind of what you were saying, right, Drew, when it comes to why the people who are actually doing these physical, spiritual practices don't end up being people who would then use these powers to take over the world, but instead go within.
Well, I think perhaps, sorry to just jump in quickly, I think perhaps maybe this is just coming to me now, you either get a choice, either or, you get to take the powerful option, but then you're not going to be able to unlock the siddhis, or you take the inward option, but then you can't demonstrate that power and use it over other people.
Yeah, there's no winning here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely spitballing, but if there was a sort of moral order within the primordial prima materia, then perhaps there would be some fail safes like that.
But then we do get the idea of this Antichrist or Lucifer figure that would be the exception to that rule, at least in that canon. Then that would be an example of someone who would unite the world, who would have these powers, and who would be seen as someone that would be good, but that would be an illusion. So I guess that's the only thing left. I don't know. Maybe there were some people who ended up using those siddhis prematurely, and then they quickly paid for it in some way. But I would still imagine, look, we're all adults here, and we're talking about magical powers. So this is a strange conversation in and of itself. But just to imagine there being someone who does enough breathing techniques that they'd be able to levitate up and just do something like invite, okay, you know what, guys? I'm going to invite all the scientists. Okay, scientists, you stay here. Here are your measuring devices. Okay, watch me. I'm going to levitate now. Here we go. Okay, got it. Good. Now your entire concept of reality has forever been changed. Everything's been documented. See, nobody's done that. So, which leads me, I don't know what that leads me to believe, because I think that there are certain things out there that are capable of coming to fruition that we're not aware of. But it's like there are so many people out there, and not one of them has decided to do that just for the hell of it. Like, what is the great filter when it comes to attempting to do that? I don't know. I mean, this is a kind of a weird question, but it's something that I've always been thinking about.
Well, I don't think it's okay. Yeah, you go, Drew.
I'm just going to interject. My friend who spent about a decade under a spiritual master in India gave up everything that he owned and lived with who he said was an avatar. There's a book that he recommended. He gave me several books, but one of them is called Living with the Himalayan Masters by Swami Rama. And in it,
that's a good book, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, he describes exactly what you're talking about in one of the passages. They're all very short stories from his life. The big picture is he was born to a pair of parents who were well above birthing age, but it was sort of like this miracle. But then the Swami comes and says, that children wasn't meant for you, he's meant for me. So he takes the kid and basically they go into a cave and he teaches them all of these mystical traditions and is completely unattached as a spiritual teacher. So the kid is constantly wavering between who's my real master, who's not, all of this stuff. And this book goes into details of all the stories that make up his experience. And one of them describes what Lev is talking about, where he finds this, he's on the path, he finds this master who is capable of, and by the way, his master is only teaching him how to meditate and starve himself in the middle of the cave and to be unattached, right? And nothing is happening for him, and he's been there for years. Anyway, he says, if you want to go and find your master, go find your master. So he's a young man, he goes out and eventually comes across this man after years of traveling who can breathe fire out of his mouth. It basically has all of these cities and can essentially just do all of these wondrous things, levitate himself. And he says, you're going to be my master. But in order for that to happen, I have to tell my master I found a new master. So he says, okay, I'll go with you. So they go on this long walk, they go back, and he goes back to his master and his original master. And the guy who says is going to be my new master looks up and sees him, falls down on the ground and says, I can't take you on because this is the master of all masters. You can't, I can't teach you anything. And so, and the guy who is the master of this guy says, so what is it that is attracting my student to you? He says, well, I can do this and I can blow fire out of my mouth. I can do this. I can do this. He says, oh, so you've wasted your time then. And that's the end, that's essentially the end of the story, that he's essentially diverted his attention away from his higher self in order to create all these powers that are only useful here and now, right? And not useful in building himself spiritually. And I think that's kind of what the trap is that in seeking power or seeking things, we divert ourselves away from this higher mode of consciousness, right? So I just wanted to bring this book up because I think it's an interesting sort of a response in the story. And there's a lot of them. I recommend the book. It's a very easy read for anybody.
That's really fascinating. One thing that I would add, though, to this conversation is it could be an interesting thought experiment to imagine if there was this master who was capable of all these powers, but at the same time, like you said, was wasting their time. What if they just decided to pull an entire prank on the existence of, not a prank, but just do something that would completely turn the world on its head and actually invite all the skeptics, all the people who would just, be the authority figures on what is possible and what is not possible.
Go and collect their Randy prize? Is that what the Amazing Randy?
Yes. Yeah. Just do it in a very organized way. So
David Blaine.
Okay, Jules mentioned David Blaine levitated, but that's a DVD, and I'm not sure. Did he call experts on to
He held his breath underwater for 12 minutes. He's done all kinds of amazing feats that people thought were impossible prior to him or were not very possible. So I think, David Blaine has studied under these Hindu teachers, and so I think, or he at least has studied their ideology. So I think, when we do see them, I would actually like to say there's a man a man named J.P. Farrell. You all should be watching if you're interested in someone who is practicing miracles, so to speak. He is somebody who is changing, who can take people who are broken bones, broken faces, people who have been in traumatic accidents. And apparently, and I actually know JP personally. I haven't seen him do this, but it's documented through x-rays and photography. He is able to essentially fix people through some miraculous wave of the hand. And he's documented it. And the amazing thing is that he is getting funded by some of the biggest names in science right now. He has raised millions of dollars by pharmaceutical companies, people who are very careful with their money. Yeah. But so JP is he is opened, unfortunately due to COVID. It's not currently open in Princeton, New Jersey, and he has his own medical right next to Novo Nordisk, and he actually has funding by Novo Nordisk, also the Rockefeller Foundation, all this stuff. I mean, they're just piping in millions of dollars for him.
Oh, red flag right there.
Well, I mean, to some degree, right? But you can say that, like, sure, but these people may also be interested. I think we can say that, like, very easily, coming from the conspiracy theory mindset, the Rockefellers are evil, these people are evil, whatever. But I think there's also a bigger picture that these people are also very curious to see the world transform. They're not necessarily evil people completely. I think, like, we just see we just see the effect of the cause, right? I don't want to put everything on them. There are some evil people in the world, but there are people who run foundations that want to see good happen in the world as well. I just know JP is he's a really lovely human being. He's a Christian. He says that all of his powers given to him divinely. He doesn't even call them powers. He says they're available to almost everybody. It's just about belief. So, I'm sure this is, depending on which brand of Christianity you come from, you're going to say it's heretical, but I think he has some evidence to show that he's been successful. And I think he's shown enough evidence to show that he's worthy of funding by companies who wouldn't necessarily give money if there weren't some sort of outcome, some sort of viable outcome to what he was doing.
It sounds like he's tapping into prana or vril or orgon, or whatever name you want to, primordial fire, like Heraclitus would say, whatever name you want to give, like that essence behind all things. And Wilhelm Reich, for instance, did back in the 40s and the 50s produce demonstrable experiments with what he called orgon, which was that prima materia, and he could heal people through the energy work. He had an orgon accumulator, which was basically a giant cupboard made of metal. Yeah, right. There you go, Lev. What's that, orgonite?
Yeah, that's orgonite. But I don't have an accumulator. That would be next level.
Yeah. That's the plan. The plan is to, in the utopian society, in my mind, we'll all have a.
The problem with Reich is that he was correct in a lot of ways, but yet either purposefully or inadvertently unleashed a whole heaping ton of evil upon the world. I mean,
he was super heretical in certain aspects.
Oh yeah, I mean, even his Freudo-Marxism, like his book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism. Like, if you really want to understand, like, the modern woke leftist, read Mass Psychology of Fascism and read Umberto Eco's essay on fascism. Those are like two of the, I guess, in Susan Sontag's essay on beauty, but those are like the driving heart forces of the sexual liberation movement, of modern woke politics, that, like, basically, like, women won't touch my pee-pee, which makes me a fascist. Like, that's basically the whole logic behind it, that sexual repression leads to fascism, in other words. And they have a very spurious notion of fascism, but I think it's, yeah.
No, you're totally right. He had a huge reactionary strain. I mean, I asked this question to a friend of mine who's a big fan of Reich, and he sort of said that because of the time that Reich life, he was a very free spirit, if you were, quote unquote, and so he had this reactionary strain that unfortunately instigated a complete moral dilemma on the Western world.
But I think we're touching on something extremely important here. This tendency of rebelling against something, even if the rebels themselves have a lot of other good things to offer. I wonder if we can connect that to what is happening today in these times we're living in, when it comes to, like, going back to Tyler, the documentary that you recommended to me. How much of that is also this tendency to rebel against this order and to want to create a world with only good intentions of this philosophical city on a hill that would be a guiding light for everybody else that the founding fathers wanted to create? How much is that turned into something that maybe some prophet back during the biblical times would have predicted to be what they predicted it to be?
Well, that's like exactly the logic of if you read the book, well, it's by Leo Strauss, but really it's Leo Strauss and Alexander Kojev, called On Tyranny, where they both comment on this very short Greek episodic story where it's the tyrant Hiero, and his advisor Simonides, about what is the best life and how a tyrant has more capacity for happiness and joy than the average citizen. And you mentioned about what drives people towards power. And really, because Alexander Kojev is a Hegelian, maybe we should have Logo Dialis on for this, because he's a big Kojev fan. He talks about recognition as being the fundamental basis of all politics, and he really doesn't distinguish between legitimate authority and tyranny that Leo Strauss does, because Strauss is a classicist and he's wants to preserve transhistorical truth and all
he's
that.
He's a Platonist, right?
Yes, he's a Platonist in the political context. But but Kojev talks about how, while a tyrant within a certain region is only limited to that region and those people, but rather the ultimate prize is to be recognized throughout the whole world in what he calls the culmination of the, historyless universal state, which is, the basis of, Fukuyama and neoliberalism. And Kojev, he basically was the architect of the European Union. So he said, we have to shut off political philosophy eventually and go into politics and change the world, because he said that eventually it's going to happen. It's inevitability. It's the Hegelian sort of dialectic of absolute spirit. And so eventually the tyrant will realize that the ultimate good is this universal historyless state, because Simonides is trying to convince the tyrant Hiero, that the best life is supreme recognition, according to Kojev. Therefore, he's like, Hiero, why don't you treat your citizens good rather than, treating them with fear? He said, why can't you be nice to your citizens? Because then they'll be more loyal to you. Then they will recognize you more. And so it seems that this logic of the culmination of various historical forces into a universal world state, this is what Kojev is really getting at. So politics, in that sense, Lev, to answer your question, is fundamentally about recognition on a deeper, almost occultic level to the people in power. Because or else why the fuck would they care, right? Like, honestly, like they would just do their Alex Jones world population control, the Georgia Guidestones limiting the population to only a fraction of the percent. Like, why didn't they do that already? I mean, they're probably going to do it eventually. Who knows, right? But because they need this sort of power of recognition, ultimately, at the end of the day, the master-slave dialectic. So there you go.
Yeah, I agree. I think dead people are far less useful than
exactly. It's biopower. Exactly.
But living people who are slaves.
By the way, someone posted over here the Richard Grove, who's been on fire in the chat here, btr-chat. He posted this image of the Tower of Babel, and there is a building in Brussels, I believe, a European Union building that looks awfully lot like the Tower of Babel.
I think the Hague looks similar as well.
But then
we all know the Hague is a total farce, but that's
but then also this photo over here with these stylish sunglasses. You know what this reminds me of?
Well, they were both neoliberals, so I mean.
Now you gotta admit though that Pinochet, he did end up stepping down. Like there was an election and he lost the election and he stepped down. So kudos. I mean, for all the the secret police and all that stuff. Like keep in mind that Chile back then, before he got in there was so much problems going on with the communists and so much violence as well. So it's like it is one of these unfortunate things where this
is a recent debate on Twitter, by the way, between certain warring factions that we all know their names, between whether the glow in the darks funded the communists or whether they funded the fascists like Pinochet. Although I wouldn't say Pinochet. Well, he guessed that he was a fascist, but let's face it, he was just a authoritarian capitalist. Whether they funded, and it's like who funded more, and it's like no, they funded the communists more. No, they funded and then they funded both. Read Anthony C. Sutton. They funded both. So this whole war on the internet, it's just using people as troll shields. And never mind, I'll say no more. But I guess you can hazard to guess the two main parties in this ideological war on Twitter. But
they definitely funded both. But
yeah.
If I were to take one side of that Twitter war, I would say that.
Do you want Twitter war? Abolish Friends, bring back Menaquan 4.
I would say that if I was to be nice, which I'm inclined to do about them, the fascists took a lot of the funding. Like, for instance, the German war machine was funded by American industrialists, essentially. But so was the
foundations,
so the foundations, and so was the Soviet war machine as well. But that the fascists used that pragmatically to then sliver from without the yoke that they were under, I guess. Whereas the communists, that was more like the direction that these industrialists, these shadowy figures that we perhaps know the name of or perhaps not, they were of far more congruent ideologies. Because one is internationalism and the other one is nationalism, I would say, like if you had to explain, like I'm 5.
It's interesting. Like I know that there were people out there like, for example, Patton, who was in favor of going after the USSR after World War II, which I also would have been in favor of, even though it would have meant that I would have never been born, probably. Just because when you do something like that, the odds of two people meeting to produce me after whatever transpires is low, but still, like, the Soviet Union, it's one of those you should probably put it out of its misery type of situations when it comes to the poor people who are being subjected to living under that totalitarian regime. Especially while Stalin was still in charge, and you never knew like how long Stalin had left to live. He may have lived much longer than he did, so he was already preparing to send the Jews to concentration camps to exterminate them, taking off of what Adolf Hitler wanted to do. So, these minds, I think they think alike, and Russia should have been stopped way earlier. It was not. I don't know how many people in the United States intelligence services were responsible for funding and propping them up. That is something that I would love to have some smoking gun type documentation for me to look at, so that I could say fully yes, they did prop both sides up. Where could I find it?
There is some good info on that on Twitter. His account is Drew Tang at home.
Oh, I know Drew. Yeah, Why doesn't Drew come on? By the way, Drew.
Drew should come on. Yeah,
yes.
I'll tell him to come on.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, Drew's great. I would love for him to come on, and to also have somebody on at the same time who is like very mainline, like very standard, only goes by, you know, the sources, you know, somebody who's like well respected in their position, and to just like take one particular part of it, not just go the full gamut, but take one part, just one part, and just dissect that until the point that that person would say like, okay, I am convinced that what you are saying is indeed the case related to this particular document.
Like a Martha Nussbaum?
I'm not sure
like
who's
a
that.
Soviet historian. So we get Drew Tang to basically break Martha Nussbaum. That'd be crazy. That'd be amazing.
Well, I'm not even talking about like Soviet historians. I mean, I'm not really sure what exactly she does. I'm talking more about like a New York Times writer or something. You know, I'm just talking about like people who have a very particular perception of reality that does not go challenged, and I would want to introduce certain things to challenge it. Again, maybe this comes from that same desire that I have for there to be like somebody with superpowers to show them off on camera with scientists around, because I understand what you're saying about David Blaine, and that's really fascinating, but still, for the skeptics out there, they could still say, okay, well, maybe the human body is capable of like holding in more oxygen or going through certain processes. I'm talking about defying the law of gravity here, you know, so I'm talking
It
about
was like that movie. Have you ever watched the Cindy movie? I forget the title of it, but it was about this guy that lived forever from the Neolithic age, but he like kept changing places, and he has like 12 PhDs or something.
Wow.
You ever hear it? And
No.
apparently, yeah, it's this movie. It's where the whole movie is basically him and his friends. He's about to leave from the history department.
Is this a movie or a documentary, by the way?
It's a movie. It's an actual, it's like an indie film.
Okay.
Where he claims that because he lived forever, that he was like, this is like total hippie shit, but he came from the East. Like he learned breathing techniques from various Buddhist masters and Zen masters, and he went to the Levant, and he claimed that he was Jesus, but that he was tricking people by using Eastern breathing techniques, and that really they mistook him for Christ, and that he had to move on because like he lived forever, and like when people realize that he didn't age, he has to like go somewhere else. Like it's a really stupid concept, but that's what it just reminded me of. I'll look up the name for you, but yeah, look up this.
Very, very interesting. So before we go, like it's 7:28 right now, I think we may cut this one a little bit short. Drew, I really appreciate your time. This has been excellent. Like I'm not even sure like what are some last things you guys want to ask Drew? Because Drew, I really want to thank you for being here. You have so much knowledge, and it's incredible.
Bring him back on. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
I have one place I want to go before I go, because I think we're talking about the roots of this. And one of the more interesting things that I think when we talk about the secret societies, and I think we were talking earlier about the cremation of care and all of this, there is one place in the world that is veiled in secrecy that I think people could do more to research. And the story, I think, of all of demonology, all of this, all has to do with fallen angels, right? This is the whole crux of it. And in the Bible, they talk about the fall of Lucifer. A lot of different documents talk about the fall of Lucifer and specifying where it happened. And we can see that it's named. This place is named. It's called Mount Hermon. I think it used to be called Mount Sirion. This exists in the Golan Heights between basically above, just on the border of Palestine, or I think Jordan and Israel, and is this heap of mountains. And it just happens to be on the 33rd, the negative 33rd, and the negative 33rd degree parallel. This space happens to be where the early Baal rituals of the Canaanites happened. And this essentially, after having all of this excavations being done around the site over the course of several years, they see that this wasn't just important during the era of the Canaanites. This had importance over the course of thousands of years. And they can see remnants of religious sites all the way up to the Romans who had come to this space and built it. And they have found hundreds of cultures who have venerated this space. This space is also where Jesus went up and had his epiphanies and talked to Abraham and Moses. And I think Abraham is thought to have also gone up to talk to God in this space. In terms of the Western civilization, this is the idea. When you talk about Hermes, you talk about knowledge being passed from the gods to humanity, or if you want to get into demonology, if you want to go into ufology and aliens, this space is very important for that research. And I think not a lot of people really give it the attention that it deserves. Right now, at the peak, at the summit of it, is the UN, some UN headquarters, and they now have everything reserved where you can't go there anymore, where these the most
surprise
the most important temples used to be. But it's an entirely sacred site. At some point in time, it said this is where they've sacrificed children into this big, either it was a bear or something. You know, there's different depictions of it, but this is the big
Moloch?
rock. Yeah, basically this is where the idea of Moloch comes from. It was called Baal back, it was called Baal back then. So, I think we all go back to when we talk about nations, essentially we talk about all of this stuff. We were talking about Epstein. All of this has a birthplace, whether directly or indirectly, to this space in Israel. So I would, if people want to do more research on that, I think it's a good place to look. It's entirely important. I think it's also where I think the birthplace of a lot of civilizations happened, including Christianity, because I think this is where, I think where Jesus had his apotheosis and all of this. So, yeah, that's what I have to end with.
That's fascinating.
Otherwise, I loved having a conversation with you all. I love sharing knowledge as always. Keep safe. Don't ask the gods for too many things, because I think the cruelest things a god can do is grant wishes.
That is really well said, Drew. I really appreciate it. And I think for a future upcoming episode, I would love to focus even more on what happened in the past, talking about the antediluvian times, talking about, I would love, for example, to have on Helios Logos, even though I know, like, right now he's focused a lot on his podcast. Highly recommend listening to it, called Sunblind. Look that up, Helios Logos. He talks about how certain, I don't know if it's like all the human beings, but some of the human beings come here from Venus, and how the moon is artificially constructed, and how it's actually like they're finding rust in the moon. So
rust, yeah, and Venus has suddenly just recently got some form of like primordial soup life that they might have detected.
Yeah, it's very fascinating, and it goes to the idea that I personally subscribe to, that we as human beings, the difference between us and the animals is that, well, I'm not going to get into it too much right now. I think it's still a work in progress for something that I'm thinking of that's going to change the entire world, so I'm not going to get into it right now. But I will say, though, that I've subscribed to the idea of human beings being more of an idea made manifest than what is usually considered to be our origin. But anyway, that is what I gotta say. Does anybody else have any final thoughts? Anything you want to ask Drew before we go?
I'll just say, just on what you're talking about quickly, there's I think his name is Samuel. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Ein Ware. He was Colombian, perhaps, and he was the leader of a spiritual movement. It was a Gnostic movement, a particular type, but he lent heavily on the theosophical thoughts of Blavatsky and others.
Steiner and all that.
Yeah, and he talks about very in-depthly. I think he's got a book. I wish I could remember the name. But he talks very in-depthly about.
Here we go. I found him. Samuel on War.
Yeah.
Weird name, but here he is.
Weird name, yeah. Yeah, that's him. Yeah, and universal Gnosticism. That's it. And he talks about the several races of man. You know, and so he talks about the Hyperboreans and Atlanteans, Aryans, which is our current race, and then he has a whole cosmology that is very, very in depth. Like each race then has seven. There are seven races that he talks about within one timeline or one iteration of man. So one anthropos, I think is the word. And then within each race, there are seven timelines of man. And then within that, there's another seven. And it has this 777 number, which is sort of perennial and very mystical, I guess, but it's worth going into.
Well, it's interesting to differentiate the 777 from the 666 that we find in the Washington D.C. In that what's going on with me today? In the stick, you know what?
The
obelisk. Thank you. What is wrong with me? Everybody subscribe so that I can get my sanity back.
Is that? Does anyone get that reference, by the way?
Which reference? Say it again.
If you're 555, I'm 666. Don't you want to be a heretic?
Well,
it's a Slipknot song.
Okay.
Sorry, I know.
I'll take a look at it. But still, there may be something to that, right? Like Drew, I guess to ask you one final question. Do you see there being anything to this 777 being utilized and the example that Disco Orpheus was talking about versus the 666 being utilized in Washington, D.C. and the obelisk and other formations?
Well, I would say that with reference to first with 555 to 666 is 555. Wait, I'm sorry, 555 inches is 66 feet. So if you convert inches into feet, you go from 5 to 6, and so the Washington Monument is 5,555 inches tall and 666 feet tall, and 555 inches wide and 66 feet wide at its base. So you can do the math and convert. I did this with the entirety of Washington, D.C. My book comes out in 20 years. When I feel like I'll have the time to write it, maybe. I'm sorry, what was the question?
So the differentiation between everyone's using 666 over here, and then you have this example of 777.
Well,
I've heard other examples as well.
I would just say that thinking a little bit more deeply about 666, which first of all, by the way, the Democratic National Committee Convention has gone with Build Back Better, lowercase b, lowercase b, lowercase b. What does that look like to you? The 666 is there's a lot of different things to it. One is I think we get it in the West. We get the idea of it from scripture, where we come to the idea of like 666 and the horsemen of the apocalypse, all this, but it actually comes from Jewish Gnosticism, mysticism before that. And if you multiply 6 times 6 times 6, you get 128, and those are the amount of numbers and letters in the name of God. So it's a numerological value. It has a lot of different meanings to it depending on what you go with. It also has to do with cubic forms. It also has to do with Pythagorean's theorem, because the 6 times 6 times 6, basically if it's the Pythagorean cube versus the Pythagorean square. So, you can go very deeply into the numerological values of what it means. But you just have to ask the question, like, what when you see these forms and figures, what are they introducing? What are the concepts and the keys they're trying to introduce? And I always go back to, it's like whether or not it has a secret meaning or not is one thing. Whether or not it is being used to control human beings or as a way to manipulate reality, that's different. So, you know, this is the distinction that I make, and we go easily into what's called demonology. I always rest there. People can have their own value system, their own religion, all of this. But when we use the mechanics of this in order to empower oneself to manipulate other people, this is where we have a problem. Or for personal gain, this is where we start getting problems. This is where we get into fouls, all of this.
Can I add to that? I also think 666 is representative of the confinements of matter, because it's carbon, 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 6
The
electrons.
Pythagoreans figured this out. But I guess everyone in the ancient world was stupid, right? So before the advent of the telescope.
I think what it says to me, at least, is it represents the confines of the material world, and that's the cube, you know. And this is why you have the cube of Saturn and like this, or maybe not. That's not why, but it's a correlation.
Drew, have you seen the black cube memes?
Yeah.
So yeah, pretty interesting stuff there. I mean, the Kaaba was originally a place in the Middle East before Islam where they stored a lot of these idols. So
well, the Kaaba is inside the Kaaba is the stone, right?
Yeah.
And that was a meteorite that fell down. Nobody knows where it is, but I actually connect that with Mount Sirion, and I think that there's a theory that the Kaaba stone is theoretically what is venerated as the crown, the pearl from the crown that fell from Lucifer's crown. So you know, why does this mystical religion, and this gets into demonology, I think, why does this mystical religion that essentially has deteriorated away from anything that depicts anything specific, has no crosses, no depictions of anything, but at the center of Mecca is this symbol, is this magical symbol? And I would say that the answer to that is, we get back into demonology. We get back into being able to secretly manipulate human beings as a way to traffic people to gather energy around these things that are not what they seem.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Fellas.
This is the constriction of consciousness within the material world, is how I kind of understand it. And that's
Tyler, do you have anything? Tyler, sorry to cut you off, Disco, but Tyler just brought us a stunning revelation.
Oh yeah.
Apparently,
yes.
Ginsburg died.
Oh my God!
We finally kill her. Oh,
We did.
Now I can release
with our incredible energy.
I can release a painting, by the way. This means I can release a painting now.
Did he try to sober up?
So
Did he go,
what does this mean for the judges now? Like when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passes away.
Oh, that Ginsburg. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trump better hurry. That's all I gotta say. Trump better fucking hurry. Oh my God.
So
she'll be wheeled out tomorrow, and she'll just still be alive. You know, I feel like Ginsburg died 2 years ago.
That's what I thought. I was surprised.
Probably.
Yeah, well, I know, respect for the dead and all that.
Pump her fast enough with enough adrenaline.
Rest in peace.
But one last thing, the star and crescent, that was also a symbol that was denoting the moon, also called sin, and the Venus, which is also Ishtar. So now we go back to Ishtar that we talked about in the very beginning, the star and crescent symbol that has always been really prevalent within Islam. So it's like, yeah, a lot of interesting stuff. I want to cover all this in the nitty-gritty in the future. We're going to have a bunch of episodes like this. Drew, I would love for you to come back. This was amazing.
Thank you. And let's watch the rituals that happen around Ginsburg's death.
Yes. There will be
close to generation of this saint, please.
Yeah, just like all the Kobe stuff and all, like it's fascinating.
There will be a ritual. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Yeah.
Well, guys, thank you so much for watching.
I could feel the force. I could feel the affluent white liberal females just crying their eyes out right now. I can feel the disturbance, the energy. I could suck it like an energy vampire. It's good. Oh
man.
boy.
All right, well, guys, this has been an incredible stream. I really want to thank everybody for watching. Guys, please don't forget to subscribe. Gio, next week, we are going to do an episode on mentors, and it's going to be based on the article that you wrote, so I'm really looking forward to that. And from here, I just want to say again, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Go to our Patreon, patreon.com/breaktherules of the $20 patrons get an incredible print from Gio, limited time offer, and this is it.